when everyone's let in, um, I'll just maybe give a couple minutes and then start. Or should I just start right away, you think?
Okay, we're rolling, so let me let folks in.
Good morning, everyone. We will just wait a moment to make sure everyone rolls into the Zoom. So I think people will still be rolling in, but we will just get started now. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the technical meeting and docket 250806 for the annual EV charging program review year 5. We really appreciate you all attending remotely today. We wanted to make sure we allowed as many participants and stakeholders to join as possible, and we look forward to productive discussion. My name is Arthur Lefebvre. I'm the staff attorney assigned to this docket. And for those of you who have not attended a roundtable technical meeting before the authority previously, today's discussion is intended to be more informal and more of an open discussion that allows the authority to further refine the aspects of the program. And today's focus will primarily be to create a back and forth dialogue to discuss implementation of Public Act 25-173 modifications to the program, the EDC's annual report filings, and the responses we received to the recent written comments and interrogs in the docket. So today's meeting will be facilitated by myself and Jenna Vigrass, who is Pura's lead staff member assigned to this docket. Commissioners Arconti and Karen had previous commitments, so I will be serving as presiding officer for this meeting. We do have a court reporter with us today, as this is an official proceeding in front of the authority. Today's agenda will begin with roundtable introductions. We'll then move to the EDC's presentation, which will summarize their annual report filings, including a summary of the analysis performed by the EM and V vendor, as well as their proposals contained in motion number 7 regarding modifications to the program to comply with the Public Act. We'll then move to a short presentation from Clean Transportation Communities of Southern Connecticut. The agenda originally held time for questions following those 2 presentations, but we're going to hold questions until we get to the open discussion. And when we get to that open discussion, I'll ask roundtable participants that were specified as representing their organization to turn on their cameras, and then Jenna and I will facilitate the discussion. So at this time, I will ask all roundtable participants, again, who were self-specified as representing your organization, to turn on your cameras, and I will just go down the list and have you introduce yourself. So I'll start with Eversource.
Thank you, Attorney Lefebvre. My name is Kevin Bond. I'm manager of Clean Energy Strategy with Eversource. I'm joined today by Jen Riley, supervisor on our e-mobility team. Or do you want them to introduce themselves, or do you want?
Or you can, whatever you prefer.
Okay. I'll let everyone introduce themselves. Maybe that's better. So Jen, please.
Good morning. My name is Jen Riley. I'm the supervisor of Connecticut's electric mobility team. Happy to be here to answer any questions.
Good morning, everyone. Amanda Stevens, our manager for managed charging and demand response at Eversource. I'll hand it over to Mark.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Moniz. Amanda's team focused on managed charging at Eversource. Who's next? Anyone else from Eversource? I do not see. Maybe I'll pass it over to Rick.
Yep, or we can move to UI.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Morris. I'm a manager of clean energy policy at UI, and I'll pass it off to my colleague, Mr. Rosa.
Good morning, Rick Rosa, Senior Manager of EV Programs for UI. We were going to have Charles Spence, who is a manager of our vehicle to grid integration programs for UI. Unfortunately, he was not able to join us today. So it'll just be myself and Mr. Morris.
Thank you. OCC.
Good morning, Tom Wheel for the Office of Consumer Counsel, and Albert Zablowski from OCC is also on today, and he asked me to introduce him because he's shy.
Thank you. I'll move to ChargeScape.
Hi, everybody. Amy Finley, Head of Policy at ChargeScape. And I have with me Amelia. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Amelia Dronker, Business Development Manager at ChargeScape.
Thank you. I'll move to Clean Transportation Communities.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jeremy Schulich, Deputy Director at Clean Transportation Communities of Southern Connecticut.
And EV Energy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Akhil Jarawala. I'm a Group Product Manager here at EV Energy, and I'll pass it over to Max.
And I'm Max Clark at EV Energy, Senior Client Success Manager.
Thank you, everyone. So we will get going because we have a lot on the agenda today. So I will hand it off to the EDCs for their presentation.
Thank you very much. We'd be grateful if the case coordinator would run the slides. Thank you very much. So we can just get right to the agenda, please. Thank you. So yeah, this morning, again, my name is Kevin Bond, Manager of Clean Energy Strategy. This morning, we'll be taking you through our 2025 program updates, including a handful of updates on the various managed charging programs, and then some detail on our network service provider corrective action plan in the commercial Make Ready program. And then we'll get to the proposed program recommendations, including a recommendation on the MUD Level 2 EV lease program. And then we'll take you through the EDC's proposed response to the legislation, and in the slides we've designated as Senate Bill 4, but also Public Act 25-173, which has wide-reaching impact on the implementation of the EV program and the response to which we designed to minimize program interruption and customer confusion, and aspects of which still need resolution. Hoping, look forward to productive conversation on those aspects. And then finally, we'll end with just an update on our uptime incentive recommendation. And so I'll kick it over to Rick Rosa for the 2025 program updates.
Thank you, Kevin. So I'm going to cover a few topics regarding our residential managed charging offerings and commercial managed charging offerings. Going to be brief as we need to want to get to the program recommendations, but we'll start with the MUD managed charging pilot results. The MUD managed charging pilot was launched in January of this year. Just as a refresher, or for those who may not be familiar, there are 3 intended phases of the pilot. The first phase kicked off with the launch of the program in January, which did not require any specific or special technology. It was basically enrollment of EV driving tenants with telematics into a modified version of our existing residential managed charging program for single families, just with a reduced incentive level. And also there was no active control, only EV driving tenants could only participate in the baseline tier in phase 1. Phase two was to integrate and is to integrate with EV charging infrastructure, EVSE networks, so that we could allow customers that might use devices such as an RFID card or a PIN pad on the EVSE. We could identify the participant plugging into that public charger and allow them to participate in the program through that methodology. We've currently integrated with ChargePoint chargers for this implementation of phase two. And we are also in the process of integrating with switch chargers as well. And phase three was the deployment of a technology that allows the EDCs to essentially integrate directly through access to the EVSE network and with the permission of a site host and control charging directly through the EVSE at the site host's location. And in that phase three, active managed charging would be possible in phase three. I accidentally have on this slide Q3, that should be Q4. That development is currently in progress. And we look forward to implementing that later this year. Just again, for a refresher, when I mentioned phase one is open to any EV driving tenant right now, and that is similar to the single family program, other than the fact that the incentives are a bit different and they're only participating in the baseline tier. So in the MUD pilot, EV driving tenants get $50 for enrolling in the program and can earn $10 for each month. They charge less than 80% of the time off during peak hours, defined as 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. There are currently 4 participants in Eversource's pilot, and UI does not have any EV driving tenants enrolled in its pilot. The EDCs filed a motion on April 30th requesting review and approval per an order issued in the last program review for a site host to receive a one-time incentive of $250 and an additional $50 per enrolled tenant. And that site host incentive would be capped at $1,500. That motion has not yet been ruled on, and the authority has requested written comments from stakeholders on that, but we've not yet seen a ruling on that motion. Even with the low participation, early results are suggesting that EV driving tenants that are enrolled in the program are consistently meeting that requirement of charging 80% off peak. And so the early results are promising, but that is a small sample size. And but if that sample size is representative, we expect to see success as the pilot continues, which is a segue to the next slide. The EDCs filed motion 6 on August 1st, or excuse me, on July 18th, requesting an extension of time for the pilot up to August 1st of 2026 to allow us to continue to gather data on the pilot and the technology that was proposed in the pilot was, as I said earlier in the previous slide, is planned to not be fully deployed until later this year. And in addition, the pilot, going through the end of the year would be fairly difficult to pull together a good analysis of the program and the success of the pilot. If we didn't go further in the delivery of the program. So Pura granted the extension request on July 28th in its motion ruling. And as I said, the extension is necessary to perform a thorough and statistically valid evaluation. And a ruling on motion 4, which I discussed earlier in the previous slide, supports the pilot site host incentive discussed in the previous slide, and be beneficial for the pilot in recruiting MUD site host participation. And then next slide, please. Fleet light duty participation. So the light duty fleet participation program has been available since 2023. Just a reminder of the structure of the program. There are 3 variants. There's an event-based manual integrated and then an integrated demand response variant and a custom managed charging variant. And just to quickly hit on those 3 variants, the event-based manual demand response variant is a variant where the EDCs cannot integrate with the EVSE on the site host location, and the site host must manually implement the demand response when we initiate an event. The integrated demand response variant is, as I said, we have integration with the EVSE from the fleet's site, which is, as we've said before, typically not common, as commercial chargers are not typically ones that are commonly integrated with. And then finally, we have the custom managed charging variant, where customer can provide we work with the EDCs, work with the fleet owner to develop they have technology on site in their systems and the expertise on site to be able to implement a localized managed charging program of their own EVSE, and we work with them to develop a customized managed charging variant. The incentives for this program vary depending upon how customers participate, i.e. those 3 variants I discussed, and the size of the charger in terms of its kW nameplate. So the larger the charger, the higher the incentive. The incentive can be as little as $5 per port per month, up to $40 per port per month. So the fleets that are enrolled in the program, Eversource has 2 light duty fleets enrolled, and UI has 1. And all of those participants are enrolled in the manual demand response variant. EDCs held demand response events during the summer of 2024, and as we've illustrated in our annual report, the load curves and performance graphs demonstrate that fleets have successfully curtailed load when dispatched. The average load reduction for Eversource during event hours was just under 5 kW, and the average load reduction for UI was relatively low due to low load during non-event hours. So if there is no load on those chargers during non-event days, there is or during non-event hours, then there's really not much load to curtail. And if the annual report demonstrates that that the load on the fleet chargers in UI service area seem to be typically charging during the off-peak hours anyway. So they may be doing that manually or have implemented something on their side to always charge their fleet vehicles during the off-peak periods. I think that's the last slide for me. No. Okay. So in last year's program review, there were changes to the residential single family program. There was a streamlining of incentives for upfront rebates for EVSE and wiring. And we also removed demand response from the single family program, as there was, similar to the last slide, because we were already managing charging to occur during the off-peak period. The EDCs were really not seeing any significant load reduction in demand response events. So that was approved last year. Although PURA asked the EDCs to come back and report on whether there was a decrease or any change in charging behavior between customers that are not required to participate in demand response and those who were previously participating in demand response. And so in general, overall, across the whole program, the EDCs experienced a decrease in reported costs per port. And this was something we received an interrogatory on, and we did respond to it, but wanted to add it here on the upfront incentives. The decrease that we have seen in the upfront enrollments has really been a result of increasing enrollment with telematics. As more participants enroll with telematics, the total cost per participant goes down. So on average, if there are less people taking advantage of the EVSE or wiring rebate because they don't need it, then the overall cost per participant on average will go down. And that's what we experienced in 2025. Finally, in 2025, the results that we've seen for customers is that the rebate is covering about overall the upfront wiring or EVSE incentive is covering about 60% compared to 45% to 50% prior to the incentive structure change. The average rebate amount has not changed significantly between years, so we're not seeing a significant change in the average upfront rebate on a customer by customer basis. And in general, this points to the overall another data point that supports the project costs per participant decreasing over previous years. Next slide, please. So in regard to changes in residential charging behavior prior to 2025, as we just discussed, managed charging participants received $20 a month if they did not opt out of DR events. And we held multiple DR events during the summer months. Beginning in 2025, new participants were no longer subject to those participating in those events, and that additional incentive was removed. So our evaluation partner found that in general, Eversource customers reduced their percentage of on-peak consumption by 15, almost 16 percentage points, and UI customers reduced on-peak consumption by 8.2 percentage points. That's for all customers participating in the residential program. When we look at only those participating in 2025, there was a slight increase in on-peak charging for Eversource participants that enrolled in 2025. but very, very minor. And there was no observable difference in on-peak charging for UI participants enrolled in 2025. So our analysis is that there's no significant difference in on-peak charging amongst 2025 participants who do not no longer need to participate in DR events and have, as a result, have reduced incentives. And I think that really does do it for me.
Yep. All right. I'm going to talk about our NSP corrective action plan. So included in our 2025 EV annual report, we were directed to provide PURA an update on any corrective actions our network service providers or NSP performance or anything really related to our NSP efforts that have occurred over the last year. For those that maybe don't read the plan all the way, or the annual report, the very many pages of it, the NSP corrective action plan is focused on ensuring that the EV chargers that are installed using Make Ready funding fulfill their requirements to share their charging data with the utilities. The utilities have focused our efforts this year on improving the match rates and the uptime reporting by leveraging a scorecard system and identifying corrective action phases. And those phases range from onboarding requirements to possibly an NSP being removed from the QPL. So both Eversource and UI have focused on controls that we could institute into our processes that could really help in matching stations to data systems. Here are some examples that we list here: limiting EVSE hardware manufacturers and makes and models. So when you go into the application, customers and contractors only have a limited selection to choose from in the dropdowns. We're actually requiring photos of the site after the project is finished to see they are installed, and also requiring photos of the serial numbers to help eliminate anyone accidentally mistyping them into our systems. We're also asking that contractors or customers provide a screenshot that shows the EV charger is actually transmitting data through the API to our systems. We want to have proof that they have been configured correctly. Our newest customers to provide a copy of their NSP agreement to us. This really ensures that the software has been configured and the plan is paid for each system that gets installed under the Make Ready program. The incentive doesn't cover this requirement, but we ask for these extra documents before we pay out any incentive. It's a couple more steps than what our customers and contractors were doing before this corrective action plan came into effect, but we've really seen some great success just over this last year. And if you go to the next slide, you can see from June of last year to June of this year, our serial match rate increased at Eversource from 68 to 90%, and UI's went from 71 to 87%. And the NSP scores went up as well. So this is really good news. This means that the plan is actually working. And we attribute this success to the extra controls we have instituted, and we're really holding those network service providers more accountable to reporting data from their stations. So that's good news. We can go on to the next slide.
All right. Thanks, Jen. So the first recommendation that we're going to cover here is the ending of the MUD Level 2 lease program. This program began in February of 2023. We had not seen any activity in this program or anybody looking to take advantage of this program. in February of 24, PURA asked the EDCs to develop a lease program education and outreach plan that specifically, directed directed our marketing efforts toward that specific program. We did that. We filed the plan and executed on that plan. And despite increased marketing efforts, there really has not been any interest in this program that the EDCs have seen. And feedback, just anecdotally, what we hear from contractors. Obviously, we have lots of contractors that perform installations in the Make Ready program. When we ask them, they basically say that the ownership model that is provided through the Make Ready program currently is preferable. And alternatively, I would point out that the demand for the MUD portion or program area, I should say, of the level 2 Make Ready program continues to exceed expectations, even with the increased MUD port deployment targets that were implemented last year. And then finally, I'll close with the fact that there are many market-based alternatives, such as what we call charging as a service or private leasing models available by some charge point operators. If customers did see this as an opportunity, there were issues with out-of-pocket costs or anything like that. So given the facts, given that this program has been really we've not seen any participation. The EDCs are recommending that this program be eliminated. This portion of the Make Ready program be eliminated. It really is just detracts from the overall efforts in the program to get EV charging equipment in the places where it needs to be and where obviously customers want them. So that's all I have on this slide, and so we can go to the next slide.
Great. Thanks, Rick. So these next few slides are focused on Senate Bill 4, also referred to, as Kevin mentioned, as Public Act 25-173, which was signed into law on July 1st of this year and includes some language that will significantly impact the ongoing implementation of the EV charging program. So specifically, Section 3B of that bill states that on and after January 1st, 2026, the authority shall limit the expenses for electric vehicle charging stations as defined in Section 1619F, as amended by this act, and customer wiring upgrades of any light-duty electric vehicle charging program established by the authority in a proceeding to $20 million per year, and further limit any expenses for electric vehicle charging stations and customer wiring upgrades incentivized as part of any residential single-family customer program to residents who make less than or equal to 300% of the federal poverty level or reside in any concentrated poverty census tract as defined in Section 32(7)(x). And I apologize for reading to you all, but I think it's important that we review the exact language in the bill because it really underpins the recommendations that we'll be discussing in this section of the presentation. So in its annual report, the EDCs outlined their interpretation of this language and specifically its application to the EV charging program, and proposed some programmatic changes to align accordingly, which we'll talk through in these next few slides. It's also, I think, important to note that although this section of the legislation references January 1st of next year, there are some immediate implications that need to be addressed in 2025. To that end, we proposed a transition plan to bridge the gap to 2026, which was subsequently ruled on by the authority last month. However, we are requesting some additional clarification from PURA on that issue that we addressed in our recently submitted written comments, and we'll cover here as well in just a bit. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we really wanted to articulate our assumptions, which laid the foundation for the recommendations that we made in the annual report. So first, we assumed that the $20 million spending cap would be applied on a calendar year basis and would be allocated to each EDC following the typical 80-20 split, resulting in a $16 million cap for Eversource and a $4 million cap for UI. We also assumed the spending cap would apply to a variety of costs, including charging station and associated wiring rebates, marketing and other administration costs. Subsequent to the filing of our annual report, the authority indicated that based on their read of the legislation, the $20 million cap could potentially only apply to charging station and wiring rebates and not to the administration costs associated with the program's implementation. And I think other stakeholders opined on their interpretation as well and their responses to PURA's recent requests for written comments. And so the EDCs look forward to additional guidance on that issue. And, you know, we really want to be clear and transparent. And so we've listed out the programmatic elements that we believe the cap does not apply to, specifically the EV tariffs that both companies have in place today, capital investments that are required to electrify the chargers installed through the program, as well as costs related to both managed charging and fleet advisory services. It's also our understanding that the spending cap only applies to the existing light-duty EV charging program and not to the medium heavy-duty programs that are currently being developed pursuant to the authority's decision in docket 210917. And finally, we also recognize that Senate Bill 4 imposes new income eligibility restrictions specific to the residential single-family program. And we'll talk through that in a little more detail in a couple more slides. Next slide, please. So now we'll dive into some of the issues resulting from Senate Bill 4 and how the EDC is proposed to address those issues. Perhaps the most significant proposed change involves the program's incentive framework, both in terms of the incentive structure and the incentive amounts. So currently in the program today, commercial customers installing chargers at their locations are eligible to receive incentives that are capped on a per site basis, with different caps depending upon whether the customer is installing level 2 or DC fast charging infrastructure, and a higher cap for those customers that are located in a disadvantaged or underserved community. While both Eversource and UI have been successfully implementing this program under the existing incentive framework, continued operation of the program within the spending cap imposed under Senate Bill 4 requires that the EDCs have the ability to precisely budget the spend that'll be required to meet port deployment goals. And so to that end, we've proposed a new incentive structure that shifts the program's incentive caps from a per site to a per port basis. The table on this slide illustrates the proposed incentives for customers of both the residential and commercial programs. So for the residential program, eligible customers would receive either $1,500 or 100% of the actual project cost, whichever is lower. And for the commercial program segments, customers would be eligible to receive either the specific dollar amounts listed in this table or 40% of the actual project cost, whichever is lower. Eligible costs will continue to include the EVSE and customer and utility side make-ready costs. And so I'll briefly explain the methodology that the EDCs use to come up with these incentives, and we'll be happy to answer any additional questions during the roundtable. So first, for the commercial program segments, both EDCs reviewed historic project costs on a per port basis to really understand the level of support that has been provided since the program's inception. We then considered the reduction in spend that'll be required beginning next year pursuant to the newly legislated spending caps in Senate Bill 4. So using each company's respective revenue adjustment mechanism or RAM filings to estimate the anticipated 2025 EV program budget. The $20 million statewide budget limit results in an annual budget that is approximately half of the anticipated 2025 EV program spend. Therefore, the proposed incentives outlined in this table represent approximately 50% decrease when compared to historical incentive levels. The approach taken in setting the proposed residential incentives differs due to the new income eligibility restrictions for the single family program. So given that the pool of eligible customers will be limited to only those customers who make less than or equal to 300% of the federal poverty level or who reside in any concentrated poverty census tract, the incentive proposed for this segment is designed to cover approximately all of the total project costs for those customers that are eligible. We want to make it clear that the incentives proposed here should not be interpreted as the level of support that we think will be sufficient to achieve the current port deployment goals. As we discussed in our annual report, it is not 100% clear as to how the market would respond if these incentives were adopted beginning in 2026. And so we'd recommend that the authority leverage stakeholder input to potentially reconsider the existing port deployment goals in light of the reduced program budget. Next slide, please. So another significant impact to the program beginning in 2026 is one that I've already alluded to, and that is the new income eligibility restrictions specific to the residential single family program segment. So while the exact impact of that these restrictions will have on program participation is unknown, I think it goes without saying that the potential pool of customers that could potentially participate will be dramatically reduced. In addition to the proposed changes to the residential program incentive structure that I spoke to on the previous slide, the EDCs have also proposed a $100 managed charging enrollment incentive for customers that do not meet the income eligibility restrictions and therefore are not eligible to receive an EVSC or wiring rebate. This incentive is not intended to support the purchase and installation of an EV charger, but rather compensation for customers to take the steps necessary to enroll in the residential managed charging program. And finally, income verification is not part of the EDC's current process in this program, and therefore we'll have to develop a plan to add that capability prior to January 1st of next year. And with that, Ms. Lupoli, if you could please advance to the next slide, and I'll pass it off to my colleague, Mr. Bond, to talk through the proposed transition plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So I'm going to take you through, if you'll indulge me, even though the authority did issue a partial ruling which addressed the transition plan that we proposed in both the annual report and in motion number 7, I believe it was. I want to take you through our thought process on why we proposed it this way, because I think it helps illuminate some of the outstanding issues that we still that we think still need clarification and direction. So regardless, this first bullet, no matter what the transition plan ends up being, this first bullet is still true, right? So for the EV program to continue uninterrupted and for customer clarity or minimizing customer confusion, all the existing and future project applications and payments must be properly accounted for and attributed to the appropriate funding mechanism and the appropriate incentive structure and eligibility requirements. So the EDC's proposed the dates described in this flow chart in orange below as the most reasonable balance of the program interests and the practical implementation timeframes. And so what we proposed is a quiet period, right? So in this case, it would be October 31st, where all applications in the current paradigm would need to be submitted by. And even though that October 31st, leaves November and December, it's still a pretty aggressive timeline for the EDCs to be able to process and award applications that come in. So in this scenario that we proposed, applicants would apply to the current program under the current eligibility requirements by October 31st. The EDCs would process those applications through the end of the year, and whether or not the incentive itself was paid in 2025 or paid later in 2026 or beyond, because it was awarded in 2025, all of those costs would be able to be recovered in the 2025 RAM process and not subject to the legislation's spending caps. And then given after that quiet period, we would sort of restart from a fresh perspective. So applicants who would apply on the first of the year and after would know what they're applying for, have the eligibility requirements clearly stated, and then anything subject to applications after the year would be subject to the new spending caps. So that was the thought process to really give us the time to be able to work through the backlog of the current structure and then start fresh with the new structure. And I think we can go to the next slide, please. So the authority did issue a ruling on our transition plan, specifically saying that the authority finds that the cap, meaning the $20 million cap starting in 2026, does not apply to incentives awarded through the year-end 2025, and that the EDC shall accept and process applications for those who wish to participate in the programs through the end of the calendar year. So I think as we articulated in the written comments, we think there's some tension in those two sentences. And I'll tell you why. So we want to emphasize that the timeline of how applications are received and then processed and then determined to be eligible for award and then notified of award or awarded, and then subsequently paid when the project is completed. That timeline is can be quite lengthy, right? So the time from we receive the application to when we notify a customer of their award, on the commercial program can take more than several weeks. And for the residential program, it's not instantaneous. It's a shorter turnaround time, but it's not instantaneous. So the result is that applications received through the end of the year may not be awarded in the calendar year 2025. So this sets up a situation where we may receive applications, say, up through December 31st, but not be able to award them in 2025. And that sets up this sort of tension where the motion ruling says that the cap doesn't apply to incentives awarded through the end of the year. So we just want to be clear on, or get clarity on, some of the definitions. So particularly, we want to make it clear that either the $20 million spending cap doesn't apply to incentives awarded in 2025, or that the cap does not apply to incentives awarded to customers whose applications were received in 2025. And one of the potential outcomes, if the sort of sentences in the motion ruling language stand, is that we receive applications through the end of the year for the current program structure, and then they're basically they get awarded in 2026, and then the program sort of has to stop because we've reached the $20 million cap, without even starting the 2026 sort of annual process. We also need time to inform customers what they're applying for. So this is particularly important if the proposed incentive structures are changed, but it's also important for the residential program where the eligibility requirements are changing. And so the customer who's applying through the end of the year would need to know if they're eligible or not for what incentive. So those are some of the things we hope that we'll get to talk about and clarify in the roundtable. And then I think we can go to our final slide. So a quick update on our uptime incentive recommendation. So back in May, we filed it reads motion number 12 on the slide, but it's actually a response to order number 12 from the prior year. And in that compliance response, we concluded that we didn't recommend implementing the uptime requirements that the Con.NEVI program was implementing, but instead we would propose to further evaluate other alternative mechanisms and report them in our annual report. We did do that. We evaluated two alternative mechanisms. One was creating a target incentive based on kilowatt hours dispensed over a given hour of time, which would be sort of a substitute correlation to uptime incentive. That would be much easier for the EDCs to be able to measure and track and pay. And a second alternative was incentive based on actual uptime achieved over a given period of time, but with some recommended implementation changes to the way that the Con.NEVI program works. Subsequent to the companies evaluating those alternative mechanisms, the Senate Bill 4 legislation came out. And so that sort of changed our perspective on whether a uptime incentive should be pursued. The reason being is that the new paradigm we're under, the legislation creates 2-year program funding timelines, and by nature, the uptime incentives would be tied to a much longer timeline than the 2-year funding mechanism would allow for. So for those reasons, we're not recommending implementing this sort of delayed incentive to encourage uptime at this time, just because it'd be uncertainty, well, beyond the administrative burdens that would automatically be triggered by our attempts to implement an uptime program as articulated in the annual report and in the motions. Just the uncertainty of the availability of funding, we think, leads to this recommendation. So I believe that's the end of our presentation. So we're looking forward to the discussion to follow later this morning.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Yeah, we will hold off on any questions or comments until we get to the open discussion. I'll start off before the facilitation of the roundtable discussion. I'll pose to the group if anyone wants to speak specifically about either of the presentations. So before that, we will now move to Clean Transportation Communities of Southern Connecticut for their presentation.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for having me. I think I can share my own slides if that's okay.
Laura, does that work with the Zoom?
Yes, he should be able to share his screen.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is this working here?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, great. I'll switch it to slideshow. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks so much for having me present today. I'm going to be talking about small multi-unit dwellings, or MUDs as I like to call them, and level 1 charging. Oh, sorry, it's not actually not letting me switch slides the way that I'm used to.
Okay, if you need me to bring it up, I certainly can.
Yeah, why don't you just do that? Sorry about this.
It's okay. Go ahead when you're ready, sir.
Okay. I don't think I see the first slide though.
Is everyone else seeing the slides?
Yeah, I see it.
Oh,
I see.
Okay. Let's see.
It
I
might
guess
just
I'll
not
just.
be the one that
All
is the
right.
beginning of the presentation.
You know what? I'm working on it on my own end now, so sorry for the technical difficulties here. But so I'll just tell you when to switch, and I'll work on my own end here. Yeah. So my name is Jeremy Schulich. You can switch to the second slide now, Laura. Yeah, I'm Deputy Director of Clean Transportation Communities of Southern Connecticut. Next slide. We are an independent nonprofit, but we're predominantly funded by the Federal Department of Energy to facilitate clean transportation projects in New Haven, Middlesex, and New London counties. Next slide. So I just wanted to start with a bit of gratitude for what the program has accomplished thus far. And I know the structure is about to change as has previously been talked about, but currently the $40,000 commercial incentive for EVSE in multi-unit dwellings in underserved areas, it can really go a long way. In fact, it can make or break many projects. But we've found through stakeholder feedback that the 5-unit minimum for the commercial program can really be limiting, as the residential program, which is all that 2 to 4 unit MUDs, or what I'll call small MUDs in this presentation, the residential program really does not compensate enough given the typical costs of these installations, which really can far exceed those of the single-family homes, which I think is more what the residential program is based around. So we've discussed this with local EVSE installers, and they've estimated that a 4-space project could cost up to $20,000, and even a 1-space project could cost up to $10,000. And we've kind of tracked this with other research we've done. For example, there's a paper by the New Buildings Institute and Cal Green that came up with similar estimates. Yeah, so under the current residential program, which is only $1,000 per port, I realize that's likely going to come up to $1,500 per port, which would be a bit better, at least for the underserved communities. But yeah, still, it's really not going to make too much of a dent into those pretty high installation costs there for small MUDs. And then to further exacerbate this situation, the federal EVSE incentive, the Alternative Fuel Vehicle Refueling Property Credit, otherwise known as the 30C credit, that's going to be expiring halfway through next year. So, we would more hope that the statewide program would come up to meet that difference there. Next slide, please. So this all came about from an inquiry from a New Haven landlord of a 3-unit MUD that reached out to the New Haven Office of Climate and Sustainability, who's a close stakeholder of ours. She wanted to install just one EVSE on a common meter for her 3 tenants to use, which sounded wonderful. We wanted to help her with that. But then we had to inform her that she would not be eligible for any incentive in that scenario. So that the project was essentially dead in the water then. We did a little bit more digging on this, and we spoke with the Office of Climate and Sustainability, and they came up with the data that 41% of dwelling units in New Haven's disadvantaged communities, in fact, are in small MUDs and would similarly fall through the cracks of the program like this. So that's a significant percentage. And some small MUDs may not even have separate meters for each unit, which would completely exclude them from the program. Additionally, the current incentive structure for small MUDs precludes the prospect of several EVs sharing the same charger, and therefore the options of an outsourced charge point operator or CPO or charging as a service model, which are often the most affordable for underserved communities. These really dramatically reduce the upfront cost of an EVSE installation. But the requirement there really is that there would need to be 3 to 4 EVs sharing each charger in order for the utilization to be high enough and therefore the revenue to be high enough to pay back the EVSE provider for their initial upfront investment, so that these models can be financially viable. And in that way, the 2-port minimum that's currently imposed by the program is also a roadblock. Next slide, please. I just want to shift gears here also to talk a little bit about level 1 charging and smart outlets, because this is a very different solution than what I was just talking about. But I think it's also a particularly viable one for underserved communities in certain situations. So these are slower charging solutions that result in a lower service size and therefore costs. And they can serve more spaces with less strain on the grid. But none of, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe any smart outlets are currently on the qualified product list. And of course, the program requires the EVSE to be level 2. Yeah, we believe that even level 1 can be a really amazing solution for a lot of people, because after all, most American drivers only drive like 30 or 40 miles a day, and even a trickle charge on just a completely standard, just generic outlet that you just see like in the wall of your apartment, that would meet that need. And furthermore, even though these can be some of the most affordable solutions on the market right now, they're still by no means cheap in many situations. We were brought on to advise on a different EVSE project of another local condo here in New Haven, and they were seeking just some charging in their larger garage. And one of the quotes that they received, and in fact the cheapest one that they received, was just for 15 standard, again, like totally generic level 1 outlets. But that still totaled almost $50,000. And, again, we regrettably had to inform them, like, this would not be eligible for any incentive because these are just level 1 outlets. But, in my opinion, a project that's going to cost $50,000 should still be eligible for some kind of statewide incentive. And this is because, like, regardless of the level, like, you still often have things like trenching, long conduit runs, electrical service upgrades. All these things can cost a lot of money, even when the equipment itself is pretty cheap. Next slide, please. So I also just wanted to address the upcoming $20 million cap that was just discussed a lot. We, among many other advocates and organizations in this space, were disappointed to hear about this legislation because I think ultimately it's going to mean fewer incentives given out, fewer EVSE installed most likely, and this again is further exacerbated because the federal EVSE incentives are going to be sunsetting. But in spite of that, I still believe that it's important to make best efforts to allow equitable access to the program's benefits, as I just previously outlined. I mean, I understand you could sort of make the argument like, well, the whole program is kind of contracting a little bit now. It's time to be restructured in all these ways. This is maybe not the most opportune time to be advocating for expanding eligibility. But yeah, again, in my opinion, these small MUDs are common in underserved areas, and level 1 outlets can be among the more affordable options for people. And I think furthermore, establishing a more widely accessible program structure would further serve future program years that hopefully will have a higher cap. And I think we need to, spread it around equitably regardless. So next slide, please. Lastly, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank several signatories that signed on to the written comments that I submitted to PURA that this presentation is based on. So Stephen Winter, the Director of New Haven Office of Climate and Sustainability and a state representative, Barry Kresh, President of EV Club of Connecticut, Rebecca Kramer, who's a New Haven Community Management Team leader, and Matcha EV, a local EVSE installer. So all these stakeholders agree with the points that I presented today. And I'd really be interested in hearing your feedback and discussing this at the roundtable. So thank you so much for having me. And that was it. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Jeremy. Before we move into the roundtable discussion and pose specific questions to the group, I want to just allow a little bit of time here to see if there's any specific questions related to either of the presentations we just heard. Yes, Attorney Wheel.
Hi, thank you. I had a couple of questions. EDC presentation. I had a question about the integrated demand response variant situation. I just want for clarity. It sounded like that's a scenario where the EDC can't have direct control over the EVSC, and they're working with the EVSC vendor to manage the demand response. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm off mute. Okay. Yes, Attorney Wheel, thank you for the question. Yes. So yeah, the integration with commercial EVSE is something that is not common, but yes, that is the premise. And so we do have the ability, subject to check, to, I believe now, integrate with commercial charge point chargers, but there's not a lot of those integrations. So that's why we've kind of pointed to the technology that we're developing for the MUD pilot, and we think that could be something that could be deployed, in the fleet program as well. So.
Okay. Thank you. I also just had a question, and maybe this is more a roundtable thing, about the proposed adjustment to the incentives. There's a slide showing a $1,500 residential incentive. Would that be subject to the income guidelines of the new statute? I mean, is that I was just a little confused by that, because I thought this, the idea of the statute was that there was that income restriction on residential customers. So, I mean, just plainly, I was confused how the incentive is going up, in light of the income guidelines.
Sure. And the thought process behind, thank you for the question, Attorney Wheel. So the thought process behind the increase was that the new eligibility requirements so drastically reduce the pool of eligible customers, and those customers are the ones who potentially need the most support of anyone. And so it would be appropriate to fund their installation at 100% of what we've seen as project costs, which is $1,500.
Okay, got it. So it's basically taking like the historic budget and just condensing it to the now smaller pool of eligible customers. That's what that accomplishes.
Not quite. It just because the pool of customer, like by some estimations, we think like the pool is reduced. The potential uptake would be like 95% less. So already that budget would have been shrunken.
Right.
But what we're doing is because those customers need the most support, we're taking a look at historic project costs, which are $1,500 on average, and setting that as the incentive level.
Okay, got it. I think those are my only questions about the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Rothenberger.
Yeah, thank you. I just had a question about the management of the EVSE and the managed charging element. So obviously enrollment in the managed charging program is an element of receiving the EVSE incentives. So I'm curious, to what extent are the overall program administration costs shared among the programs, and yet that could include sort of the outreach and general marketing for the program to customers? Or are they just very specifically siloed?
I'll go ahead and take a shot at that, Attorney Rothenberger, and let me know if this doesn't answer your question. So our education outreach efforts are generally directed into, we every year we submit in our annual report an education outreach plan. It's a requirement of the annual report. And so our education outreach efforts are really somewhat holistic. However, we do target specific audiences such as residential and commercial audiences. So it would be possible, it would require us to, if there was a determination that administrative costs were not eligible or not included in the $20 million cap, there would be no change to the program today. If there was a determination that those costs are subject to the $20 million cap, I think we would need to address residential and commercial costs separately, and apply them so that they would be accounted for properly under the current proposal in legislation. Does that answer your question? That's how I heard it.
It does. No, you anticipated the point behind the question perfectly. So it sounds like if there was a determination that the lower budget cap under SB4 does apply to administrative costs, that would actually require a change on the part of the program in terms of accounting for those costs. And I see people nodding their heads. Perfect. Thank you.
In some cases, there are instances where we're already partnering together, like our EM&V vendor, we share that. But for the marketing itself, that would be a change in how we're currently doing that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, not seeing any other hands raised. I'll give one more moment. Sorry, I muted myself. You can unmute yourself. Yes, Lydia Rupert.
Hi everyone. Lydia Rupert with Connecticut Deep. I have well, it's a question not exactly related to the presentation, and maybe not even a question, but more a comment or a suggestion. We are just curious to know if it's possible to coordinate the next the CFC ports because it's already closer to the target, to the NEVI program, to try to target areas that are not covered right now in Connecticut, especially the northwestern corner of Connecticut. It's I guess that there's a little bit of our lack of the CFC infrastructure there. So we were just kind of interested. Of course, it also depends on the applicants, but if there is any way of doing this coordination with NEVI, we think that it could be very interesting for the program.
I can just jump in here. As of right now, PURAs, if you have applied to NEVI, are not eligible to the program. So that would have to be a change in the requirements. And I know that they're moving forward at DOT with another round of NEVI, and we've been asked by a lot of people, will that change at PURA? And I mean, we haven't had any insight into that. But we have, just as talking to folks who are interested in NEVI and have reached out to us, they have indicated to us that they would move forward if they got NEVI and they didn't get an incentive from the utilities, because that has come up in several discussions. If I apply to you, but I don't apply to NEVI, which one do you think would be more lucrative for me? But I just wanted to give you that feedback because it does come up a lot in the DC fast charger applications.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And just to follow up, maybe if it's not possible, because I know there is this eligibility issue, but if it's not possible to stack the incentives, at least for the location of these ports, maybe this coordination could be interesting to see where NEVI is going to and where this EV charging program could also help out to try to cover all the state.
So to work with DOT to see where they're selecting and then fill in those gaps. Is that what you're saying, Lydia? Okay, I misunderstood then.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Maybe I wasn't clear enough. Yes.
One other thing I might offer in response is part of our current criteria for evaluating and awarding, because we obviously have limited DCFC deployment targets. And so part of the evaluation criteria and the scoring methodology that we use does take into account where there is less DC fast charging. So I think that's certainly something that we can take a look at and see what we currently are using for those areas that are low and charging port availability, and see if we've got them dialed in.
Thank you.
It also does depend on timing. DOT, it takes a long time for our application to go through their process. So we have been coordinating with them on, they send a list to us, to our field designers and engineers to see, how much upgrade will be needed. And so we have an inkling of where they're even, their applications have come in. So we have used that in the past and touch base with the DOT folks to see which ones are you moving forward with and how does that align with what we've got in our pipeline. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions and comments there. So at this time, I'll ask roundtable participants, again, that were self-specified as representing your organization, to turn on your cameras. And I will hand it over to staff member Jenna Bygrass to begin the roundtable discussion.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. So I have a couple of specific questions, and then I'll open it up to you for a roundtable discussion. My first question actually was to follow up on Ms. Riley, the conversation you were just having about coordinating with DOT on the NEVI program and how there is a second round of, I guess, grants that are opening up, and folks are wondering if there might be a modification to the authority's guidance. And I was wondering if you could provide more information on what people are interested in, like hoping that the guidance will shift in some way.
I don't know if I have a great sense of that. I've only talked to maybe 3 individuals who are looking to apply to the next round of DC fast chargers funding, but there was definitely an interest wanting to know what are the differences between our program, the Make Ready program, and the NEVI program as far as uptime requirements and things of that sort. And what they recommended, what did I recommend to them they do? And I said, well, I mean, there's pros and cons of both programs. I don't know currently how they're structured, how they would merge together if we did open it up, because there are some requirements at the federal level that take a really, really long time to get through. And ideally, we like to have, if we give someone an award, we would like to see progress in within a year of building it. Some of these NEVI projects are taking way longer than that, just because of all the additional requirements that are attached to the program. So I see that as possibly being a challenge. How they're reporting, like the uptime and the API, is a whole different system than what we're using. So we asked DOT about that, and I don't have a clear insight into it, but it would have to, it might be burdensome for the customer or the contractor to have to report to 2 separate entities. I'm just thinking off the top of my head here. But there, I mean, there is, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I guess to clarify, so is the thought that they some parties are interested in, you know, if they apply for the NEVI funding and don't receive it, that they're still eligible to receive funding through the EDC's program?
That has come up.
Okay.
That's all I could say about that, because I haven't been able to give them a real answer on that.
Right.
Due to the requirements.
Great. All right. Thank you so much for that. So now I wanted to move back to actually CTC's presentation very quickly and ask if, Jeremy, if you might, I think in your comments you had said that landlords of multi-unit dwellings with between 2 to 4 units are kind of essentially excluded from participating in the residential incentive program. And I was wondering if you could provide a little bit more information on kind of the details that you included of kind of the limitations around meters and like allowed vehicles that can use the charger, just a little bit more detail on kind of the limitations there.
Yeah, sure. Well, those that that have individual meters can be included in the residential program. But the point I was making about that was just that the residential program offers a much lower incentive, which I think covers the costs of single family homes, which is, I think, more like how the residential program was designed. But, you know, according to the research that we did and the stakeholders we spoke to, the installations for small MUDs can still be quite expensive. Maybe not quite as expensive as those of large MUDs. You know, each project differs, of course. But yeah, so that was kind of the first point, is that like, even if they're getting the residential incentives, I don't think that those are high enough. And then the second point around that was just that it's also limiting just to require each EVSE to belong to an individual meter, as opposed to them being able to be on a common meter and have tenants share one common meter, because then that excludes certain business models, like, you know, charging as a service or the charge point operator model. which are often the more affordable options for people. And yeah, it kind of that way it kind of excludes landlords from the program because, what I was told at least is that on an individual meter, like it would essentially be the tenant charging, installing it. And then, what happens when the tenant moves out? I guess they sort of take the charger with them as long as it wasn't hardwired in or something. But yeah, even that way of doing it excludes landlords essentially from the program and the ability to share the chargers. Does that help?
Yeah, that is helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so I actually wanted to open this up to the roundtable discussion for everyone to comment on. So I was just going to go down the list and start with Eversource. So if stakeholders could comment on how, smaller multi-unit dwellings with between 2 to 4 units might participate in either the residential or commercial incentive program, and kind of what is the best way that people have seen these programs be structured for smaller multi-unit dwellings. And we can start with Eversource.
Thank you. Is it okay if I defer to UI to start, because I believe Rick Rose is a little
Sure.
bit closer to this, and then I'll be able to layer on our additional
Great.
thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, sounds great.
Sure. So I think it's important to distinguish between the residential program and the commercial make ready program here. So just to clarify, right? So what was previously authorized by PURA in previous proceedings, there was an agreement to use the definition of a multi-unit dwelling, a state definition of multi-unit dwellings of 5 or more units. I think, speaking for UI, I don't think that we would be opposed to looking at that definition for the commercial make ready program. Given that there was some, I think, rather compelling data presented. However, so when the definition of multi-unit family being 5 units or more was accepted as the eligibility criteria, the assumption was that those units being under 5 units could participate in the single family program, which has a requirement that you participate in the managed charging program. So that therein lied the requirement that those units be separately metered, because if they weren't separately metered, then you wouldn't be able to participate in the managed charging program. And so the residential program has that requirement, right? You get an upfront rebate for a smart charger and the wiring, and in return, you participate in the managed charging program for up to 24 months, actually for 24 months. So I think in the particular instances that are being pointed out here, it makes more sense to look at, if the authority were so inclined and other stakeholders were in agreement, it would make more sense to look at lowering the threshold for of an MUD so they could participate in the commercial program. That would be, I think, UI's recommendation. Is that clear? Okay, great.
That was great. Thanks.
Yeah, and so from the Eversource perspective, I just want to add sort of an even broader perspective that this issue is not unique to Connecticut. It's 2 to 4 unit multifamily is doesn't fit into the neat boxes that programs across the country set up, because that's the way it's the way everybody implements a program. There's landlord tenant issues, there's meter issues, there's are the units vertical or horizontal? Like all kinds of things make implementing residential programs at multifamily tricky as far as definitions go. And Rick's absolutely right that when the program started, there was sort of just the definition was decided on, right? 5+ is commercial, under 5 is, because that's the way the state sort of defined it. It'd definitely be like open to like even a working group that sort of looks more closely at this issue and says, how can we better address that market given the limited budget that we have? Because there is no like single neat solution that fits into that, and I definitely want to acknowledge that pain point for customers who are in that situation. So that's what I'd have to offer.
I would also add that, another factor here is, and I do agree with Mr. Bowen's comments, because, even in multi-unit dwelling installations today under the Make Ready program, right, you have very large multi-unit dwellings like apartment complexes that may have dozens, if not, 100 or more units. And those MUDs are installing, 2 to 4, possibly more ports, depending on how many individual buildings and the definition of a site under the current definition in the program. So when you start to get to a multi-unit dwelling that falls underneath, the 5-unit definition, is it really necessary for that MUD to have 2 or 3 or 4, like a port for every resident? So I think, I see someone shaking her head, and you certainly can comment on that. But so I think, what Mr. Bowen's comments are, I think we could explore those types of issues further, on like what's the appropriate, maybe, and there are also obviously issues around the budget restrictions that we're coming up against. So I think it deserves further consideration.
Great. Owen, can I respond just for a second?
Sure. Go ahead.
Because I was shaking my head. I think you were the one. I was the one that you noticed, but I was actually shaking my head more in agreement, because you were saying that 2 to 4 unit MUDs don't necessarily need 4 ports, and I was saying no. Like, yes, you're in that. Yes, you're right, or no, they don't. And that was more to my point, is that, like, so right now there's a 2-port minimum per project. And I think a one, like, the business model that I was more convinced on would be great. Like, for this particular landlord that reached out to us, was just like installing 1 port, 1 EVSE, just for all 3 tenants to share. But that was impossible, or it was not eligible for an incentive this way. Again, because it would have to be on an individual meter. And I wanted to further make the point too, like, many small MUDs don't even have individual meters at all. So there isn't even that option. So yeah, like, just allowing them to do 1 port and like a kind of shared model, I think would be amazing. Because I imagine a number of large MUDs, as you were talking about, are able to employ that kind of setup.
Yeah, agreed. And thanks for providing that feedback. And just again to clarify, under the commercial program, there would really only need to be 1 meter. So if there were modifications to the commercial program, that could be accommodated. No need for individual meters at each residence.
Right. They're not eligible for the commercial program right now, though. So yeah,
I said, yeah, if it were to be amended, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that. So now, in the roundtable order, we'll move to OCC. Do you have any comments on the conversation?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to me just makes sense to us. So there's sort of like a blind spot here. Like I think thinking of it as roughly as possible. At least I've always thought of the MUD commercial program as like what we're trying to do is provide essentially like public facing charging for common use among, as Mr. Rose was saying, something like a large
Sorry,
apartment
Attorney
building
Wheel,
where
just
the idea is, to provide.
Yeah, I think he might be he might have connectivity
Benefits.
issues. Oh, can you hear me now, Attorney Wheel?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm on my phone.
Yeah, you were breaking up a bit. I thought it might have just been me, but I can hear you better now. I don't know if you want to
Okay.
try real quick, and if not, we'll mute you again and have you try to rejoin.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. It's Xfinity's fault. Just throwing that out there. Connecticut internet provider Xfinity. Anyway, I'll summarize. It makes sense. I agree with what everyone here is saying. It seems like a viable solution, an easy solution would be to amend the commercial program, and which would require, I think, a reconsideration of the definition of multi-unit dwelling. That all makes sense to us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And now ChargeScape.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I think, we're mostly here to comment on sort of the load management or managed charging angles. I agree, just to chime in on this conversation, though, that it does seem like an oversight similar to the points that have been made. I would also, encourage this whole sort of load management piece to still be a part of it. So if there are, any sort of incentives being given to MUDs that, maybe it's not for level 1 charging, but maybe it is for, level 2 charging, just because when you think about what that means, from like a system impact perspective, level 1 charging is not nearly as significant as level 2. So just to sort of encourage, making sure that these make-ready incentives are provided to things that are actually going to cause an impact on the system.
Thank you. And now let's move to EV Energy.
Thank you very much. I don't think we have any additional comments beyond what's already been stated. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right.
Ms. Fagres, I would also just point out that in addition, when thinking about multi-unit dwellings that are less than 5 units, I think one of the use cases that was, I think hoped to be something that would be available for those EV drivers would be curbside charging. And there is currently a pilot in the IES program in UI service area. I'm not sure if it's also occurring in Eversource's. I apologize if Eversource knows, maybe they could chime in. But I think it would be very interesting to see the results of the curbside charging IES pilot that's currently in progress, because the purpose of that type of charging is to serve specifically that customer class. So I just wanted to add that.
Great. I appreciate that. Thank you. All right. So now we put together some slides with just some of our prompts for our discussion. And so, Laura, I'm wondering if you can bring that up. All right, perfect. Now we can go to the second slide. Perfect. All right. So focusing on one of the larger topics, so the program modifications pursuant to Public Act 25-173. So I believe some of these are from potentially, I think, motion number 7 or from the annual report. And so thank you for putting together this proposal. And specifically in the second image, the table C, purport historical incentive versus proposed incentive, there's the funded percentage per port. And I'm wondering if the companies could just provide a little bit more information on how those percentages were chosen, the like 30% versus 32%, 29%, et cetera. So I guess we can start with Eversource.
Yeah, so it's a little bit art and a little bit science. I'll start with that, as every like incentive design is. And I'll say that the DC fast charger set of projects is very different than the level 2 set of projects, which is much more homogeneous, right? So in the DC fast charger, the site caps cover a much lower percentage of the projects historically that we've awarded. But there's also a huge variance, right? So they're like we funded, I think, a project that was a multi-million-dollar project, but it received, $250,000 from the program. So it's obviously covering a very, very small percentage of the program. There are some DC fast charger projects where the 150 or 250 does cover, a more substantial part of the project because the project was cheaper. That usually was sort of earlier in the program where we didn't have the scoring criteria quite yet set up. So that subset's a little bit different. So just starting with the level 2 projects, we looked at what was funded per port and then appropriately apportioned trying to get it to sort of 50% of the project costs, because our budgets were or are potentially reduced by 50%. And so we tried to look at what the incentive levels were and try and get them to a sort of 50% of cost, because our budgets are being reduced by that amount, and still trying to balance that between how many ports potentially could that serve. So it's definitely a balance between, if you keep the incentive levels high, because the budget's reduced, you're gonna, just by math, support fewer ports. And so we're trying to find sort of the balance there. I don't know if Brian, you want to
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So I definitely agree with everything Kevin just spoke to. I'll just reiterate here, there really isn't a perfect answer. So all we know is that our budgets will be reduced, and again, depending upon the definition of what costs are included. That aside, the budget for the program is going to be reduced by about 50% if you look at 2025 as sort of a proxy compared to what that new annual budget's going to be next year. So this was our sort of attempt, and I think I spoke to it on the slide and we mentioned it in the presentation, but that last column, percent reduction from historical level, kind of, in most cases hovers around 50%, and that sort of reflects the approximately 50% reduction in the budget for the overall program budget versus what, we think we're going to spend this year. So we're certainly open to perspectives and opinions on this. We aren't convinced that, again, there's no perfect right answer, but this was sort of a good faith proposal that we thought was at least a starting point in kind of getting us to what an incentive structure for a program could look like beginning next year, given the reality that Senate Bill 4 places on the overall program.
Thank you. So to clarify for myself, so essentially, were you looking at the historical, essentially column B, which is that funded dollar amount per port, and then divide by half? And then that is what was chosen for the proposed incentive per port for each category?
That's correct. And there's also sort of a translation going on here too, right? Because the current incentives are a site cap, and so they're not really tied to the number of ports. And so a customer who installs 10 ports gets 20,000, and a customer who installs 4 ports gets 20,000. And so the amount of the project cost incented kind of gets warped. But yes, essentially what you said is correct. Like, budget's cut by half, we're trying to get the incentives cut by half.
And that's a good point, Kevin, that we know these things aren't happening in a vacuum. So multiple changes are happening here. So to Kevin's point, we're going from a per site to a per port, and we're also reducing them. So it gets a little bit tricky, and it's sort of to sort of understand the impact of each of those modifications and changes on the overall proposal, because both things are happening in concert.
Thank you for that clarification. So, in one of the, I believe, interrogatory responses, with the updated proposal, with the potential interpretation of the statute that the cap is only potentially applied to the capital expenses. I think the company said that the 3 million that you originally allocated towards administration costs, you kind of reallocated to level 2 ports. So can you explain whether, like, with that kind of modified budget proposal, how are the kind of program area deployment targets impacted by that? I think the company stated that the DCFC and residential segments will still be kind of fully funded to meet the expected deployment targets. But how are the other program areas impacted by that?
Yeah, so I just want to throw the caveat that mathematically supported. Okay, so we really don't know that they will actually be supported, right? So again, this is the balance of are these reduced incentives going to reduce participation to the point where they won't be practically, the deployment goals won't be practically met. Then again, if you raise the incentive, also mathematically, the deployment target won't be met. So what we display in those updated charts was the percentage of the deployment target that theoretically could be mathematically met, but doesn't necessarily, guarantee anything.
Yeah, I'll just sort of emphasize there that this really was a math exercise. We haven't done any research into what the market thinks or would think about. When I say market, it's not just potential customers, but it's also other vendors and folks that are supporting the implementation of this program. And so we don't know how these reduced incentives are going to impact the program going forward. And so it really was, I think Kevin said sort of some of it's art, some of it's science, and I think sometimes more of it's art, just in trying to sort of and do a bunch of different configurations and then kind of land on something that we think is reasonable and makes sense. And again, open it up to stakeholder input to potentially provide some modifications where appropriate.
Thank
Yeah,
you. So,
if I may add to that comment that to Brian's point is the commercial program in particular is really driven by the typical electrical contractor that does business in Connecticut or even perhaps surrounding states that see this as an opportunity for their business. And they are the ones we do education and outreach. Obviously, we do promote the program to site hosts. But at the end of the day, somebody really needs to go to that site host and present them with a business case and show them that business case makes sense for them as a site host to install EV charging. And so to Brian's point, the market really represents not just the site host, but the contractors. And that are the ones that are primarily not to say that's 100% the case. Certainly there are site hosts that may be proactive and take the first step. But the business case has got to be there, right? It's got to pencil out for them. And so what we're saying is we're simply cutting the incentives in half based on the decrease in the legislative cap and the decrease from the budget as 25 as a proxy. And in theory, by doing that, we could potentially get to the envisioned port deployment targets. But in actuality, we don't know.
definitely understood. Thank you. So I'd love to open it to the roundtable discussion now to discuss the company's proposals to modify the incentive structure from the per site cap structure that it currently is and to a per port incentive cap structure, and then the proposed incentive levels that have been provided on the slide, as well as any kind of questions for the EDCs or general suggestions around these topics. So we can start with OCC.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me. I mean, I think I understand everything the EDCs are saying. I think we said in our comments, we interpret the legislation to be specific only to the upfront incentives relating to the EVSE and the installation, and not inclusive of, as I think of the EDC slide deck shows, inclusive of marketing budgets, any administrative costs. That is not our understanding of what the legislature was seeking to limit. So I guess I just make that point. Obviously, that's open to everyone's discussion and ultimately purist determination. But as I understand what we're looking at here, that matters a lot with respect to the math that's been done here, because it's understandably based on assumptions. But those everything would have to be, I think, recalculated, maybe not conceptually entirely reconfigured, but like the things like the actual cost might change if the interpretation of what's in or out of the cap changes, it seems to me. So conceptually, this makes sense. I appreciate the answer I got before about my understanding now of the incentive increase being, subject to the eligibility change. It does, and I'll also say, like, we at OCC are very much creatures of the RAM, more so than being able to track the kind of budgets that are reported in these dockets. But I've taken a look at the 2024 actuals that were filed in the 2025 RAM proceedings, and it looks to me like as I'm reading the spreadsheets there, and I won't ask the utilities to respond to this in real time, but it looks to me that at least the costs that were reported and ultimately recovered from ratepayers, like for Eversource, it looked like it was maybe like 13 million if under our interpretation of, if you just limit it to like the incentive costs. UI maybe something more like 7 million. So I only say that to emphasize that it seems like that could make a difference. Like I said before, like if, like under a scenario like that, there wouldn't necessarily have to be a change, at least as compared to 2024 actuals in terms of the overall program budget. Again, if it's only limited to incentives. But anyway, I guess my overall comment is conceptually these ideas make sense, but it's going to depend so much, in my opinion, on what the interpretation of the statute is.
So, sorry, Kevin.
Oh, no, I was just going to mention that the both companies did respond to an IR that considers the administration costs not being part of the cap, and so there is some revised math and an answer to one of the interrogatories.
Yeah, and then Attorney Wheel, I just wanted to point out, I think, looking at the RAM and what expenditures were, at least for, a portion of the last, for 2024, is the last RAM proceeding really only covered a part of those expenses. So what's reported as in the RAM, so we really, so the EDCs, and this is an important concept to understand, and it goes back to Mr. Bowen's comments about the transition, right? So this is really important. We have when someone applies to the program, those programs, it goes through various stages of a cycle. And so we have what we call committed and completed, right? And in the annual report, they're referred to as reservations. And so, and that, as Miss Riley spoke to earlier, some of these projects, particularly DC fast chargers, could take a very long time to complete. And so we need to be able to commit to customers with certainty. Now, if those customers later fail to complete, great, we have extra money. But we assume that when we commit, they're going to complete. And so once we've committed those dollars, we can't really commit them to anybody else. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. And so really looking at the RAM, what was spent in the RAM and what is really out there in terms of what we've committed to the market are two different things.
Thanks. I understand that, and I did understand also the confusion of the EDCs on the motion ruling, and it makes sense to me. I think it's also ultimately an issue of legislative intent, right? Like it's like, does the legislature want the utilities to stop offering these incentives as of the effective date, stop paying the incentives as of the effective date, or even there's an interpretation, if you look at the RAM, does the legislature want customers to stop paying, because there's as you know, a massive lag between that too, like when the costs are incurred by the EDC and then when it actually hits the bills. So yeah, I do understand all of that, and again, I think that's also an important thing that needs to be worked out in terms of what the legislative intent for even the effective date means.
Thank you. Great. So now we can move to ChargeScape.
I'll take a pass on this one.
Perfect. Thank you. So we can move to CTC.
Oh,
Jeremy?
yeah, I don't think I had any additional thoughts on this. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And now EV Energy.
Sure. Thanks very much. I think ultimately here, we would defer to other stakeholders on decisions about how to best steward charging budget across multiple programs. But one observation that we will leave the group with here today is certainly some of the most immediate opportunity that presents within managed charging to introduce value to ratepayers is realizable through residential investments, just with the majority of charging typically being sited at those residential sites.
Yeah, and if I may, Ms. Vigrass, thanks, Mr. Clark, I appreciate that. And that's why we, in the proposal, introduced a new like managed charging enrollment incentive, because we know that so many who have enrolled in the, like load management is so important as we're adding these customers, we need to manage the load. So those customers in the future who may not meet the eligibility requirements for the residential, we still want a pathway for them to be able to enter the load management. So that's why we propose that sort of additional enrollment fee for the managed charging program, which we're interpreting to not be subject to the cap because it's part of the managed charging costs. So
Thank you for that. And can I actually ask a clarifying question? So my understanding is that the program as it is currently structured provides a $100 enrollment incentive for customers to participate in the residential managed charging program. Is that correct?
In some cases. So there's a table actually. So the most recent one, I think we included in an interrogatory response. I'll see if I can get the interrogatory response. But so depending on how you enroll currently, the current structure, you're either eligible for rebate and or wiring incentives or you're not. And so typically a telematics customer, let's say, that doesn't need a smart charger and doesn't need wiring, that customer would be eligible for a $100 enrollment incentive. Also, if you already have a smart charger and you're enrolling through your existing smart charger and you don't need a wiring incentive, that customer would be eligible for a $100 incentive. But by changing the eligibility requirements, what we're doing is eliminating a big section of customers that won't be able to get that enrollment or the wiring or the wiring or the rebate incentive because of their income. And so all we're suggesting is that $100 incentive be extended to everyone who joins the program who is ineligible for an upfront rebate, if that's helpful.
Yes. So to clarify for myself, are you essentially saying the under the new program, any of the EVSE and wiring upgrade rebates will only be available for customers that fall under this 300% income guideline, but that the managed charging program will essentially maintain the $100 enrollment incentive that's available for everyone. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, perfect. And then so the customers who receive the equipment rebates or wiring upgrade rebates will still be required to participate in managed charging and will not receive the $100 enrollment incentive to participate in managed charging.
That's correct.
Okay.
And what we've suggested, and I believe one of our interrogatory responses is for those customers that are no longer income eligible and only receive. So right now, everyone, regardless of their pathway to participation, receives needs to participate for a minimum of 24 months. What we've suggested is that only customers that receive an upfront wiring rebate and or EVSE rebate be required to participate for 24 months, and all others only be required to participate for 12 months.
Right. I saw that proposal. Thank you for bringing that up. So I am wondering, what is the motivation behind reducing that requirement of the 2 years to 1 year participation?
Just the dollar value. So there's there's an expectation that you are providing a certain. I see Ms. Stevens has come on, so I'll defer to her in a second. But basically just that in the past that there was no hard and fast rule, but that for the amount of incentive you were receiving, that a 24-month commitment seemed reasonable. So in the in the absence of an upfront incentive, up to, in this case, proposed $1,500, that there wasn't a need to have customers commit to that long of a period. That's all.
Yeah, I would support everything Mr. Rosa just said. I would just add, we want to make sure we're, because we don't have kind of a large dollar amount here available for the charger amount for a majority of customers that would not be able to income qualify. We want to just make sure this managed charging offer is attractive to customers. And, you don't want an overly long commitment to, scare people away from trying something. So, commensurate with a $100 enrollment, it seemed to us a 12-month commitment was reasonable. And of course, we hope to keep them as part of that program for much longer. That's kind of part of the customer experience and making sure that, we're delivering a program that both is serving the grid and serving them, giving them some extra incentives for helping to control their load. So that was kind of the reasoning behind that.
Thank you. So with that reduction from 2 years to 1 year, do the companies have a plan for how to keep those customers kind of in the program and continuing to participate in future years?
I think one of the great elements there would be, we've talked about doing some additional surveying on customer experience here at Eversource. So I think that's one element that would be important. We want to make sure, we're delivering a program that's meeting customers' expectations. So many of our different program areas do an end of the year customer survey on experience, and we do a little bit of that, but we're looking at kind of making sure that could be amplified to make sure we've got our finger on the pulse there. And, kind of continuing on with our comprehensive education and outreach efforts should help to give that visibility to the program, make sure customers understand the value proposition. So those are some of the thoughts on that front.
Yes, thank you. And I would only offer that, the ongoing incentives are, I think, what keeps the customer in the program. The initial $100 investment or $1,500 incentive, I meant to say, is the attraction, and then the ongoing incentive, really keeps the customer in the program, and the experience has been that once you begin to charge, you change behavior that hopefully the customer will continue that behavior, and it won't be they'll see that it's maybe not burdensome to them, and so they'll just continue on with the program.
Great, thank you. And I'm realizing actually that we have our managed charging prompts on the next slide. So Laura, I'm wondering if you can move the next slide. Perfect, thank you. And I would love to open up this conversation actually to our roundtable, because I know we have a few managed charging providers on the call. So specifically around this idea of the $100 enrollment incentive for all customers to participate in or all residential customers to participate in the managed charging program, and then this potential reduction from a 2-year participation requirement to a 1-year participation requirement. I would love to hear stakeholders' comments, or if you have any questions for the EDCs as well. So we can go down the list and start with OCC.
Sure. We do very much. We've always really supported the value of the managed charging program. I think that's managed charging, and from our view, is the kind of central ratepayer benefit of this program, and by that I mean benefit to all ratepayers, and the specific benefit to the economic benefit to ratepayers limited to the rate impact is what I'm referencing. There are of course environmental benefits, etc. So I think we'd be uncomfortable with reducing the enrollment requirement, especially, and I think this was I recall we actually testified before the E&T committee earlier on in the legislative session about the EV costs generally. I think there was some concern from the committee members there about what they kept referring to as the capital cost of the program. I don't like when people say that, because I think of capital costs as being the EDC's capital cost. But anyway, I think that the E&T committee, my personal take on it was that the E&T committee also saw at least they could follow the logic of the rationale for ratepayers to be contributing towards this program because of the associated benefits with managed charging, because of the potential peak reduction benefits, and the trade-off of the cost of those incentives. But also there's the conceptual hook of requiring enrollment in that program in order to access the upfront incentives. So anyway, that would be our concerns with any notion of reducing the enrollment requirement.
Great, thank you. All right, so now we can move to ChargeScape.
Yep, thank you. So we are definitely supportive of continuing the enrollment incentive for all customers. I think that's straight to managed charging pathway has been available for a while, and it's been effective. And I do think that the ultimate goal of these programs is really the load management. Making sure that customers are charging in a way that is friendly to the grid. The ongoing enrollment incentives, as Ms. Stevens and Mr. Rosa pointed out, are really essential to that. So it's the sort of initial carrot with the enrollment incentive to get them signed up for the program, and then the ongoing incentives to compensate that continued behavior. And I know what we've seen from customers who enroll, this whole sort of set it and forget it, making it sort of a routine behavior. I don't think you're going to see a lot of fall off in the 2-year versus 1-year requirement. If you were to change that, I think a lot of customers will end up staying on anyways, because it's easy and you can continue to earn those incentives. So I know we had looked into this previously, as a concern, just sort of speaking from when I was at Eversource, because we did want to make sure that customers were fulfilling that obligation to stay in the program for the full time. We found that attrition was really low. So you didn't see too many customers who were actually, coming in and trying to game the system by only enrolling to take advantage of those upfront incentives. They generally did stay in the program for 2 years or beyond.
Thank you for that. And now I guess we can move to Jeremy at CTC.
Yeah, I guess I had a little bit of a more basic question about this. To determine the income eligibility in the proposed new residential incentive, the $1,500, is that using some of the state's previous criteria with this? Like, even anyone who lives in a distressed municipality would be eligible, or a low-income census tract, or does it actually have to do directly with income?
So based on the language of the bill, there are two different potential pathways. So one is based purely on income, as your income relates to the federal poverty level. But there is or who reside in any concentrated poverty census tract. So I guess there's multiple pathways depending upon, one income level, and then one based on where they reside and if that's in a poverty designated census tract.
And would that include just a distressed municipality as well, or no? No,
Not by our reading, no.
no.
A distressed municipality is a different definition than a concentrated poverty tract, which is
Right.
a smaller number. But just to be clear, that applies only to the charging incentive and the wiring incentive, and not to managed charging program overall.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Great. All right, now we can move to EV Energy.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think overall we would echo the comment shared by some here on supporting the continuation of that enrollment incentive to all participants in the program. I think it was hit on well that those really serve as that initial motivator to bring people into the program, and then similarly not seeing much in the way of concern on moving from a 2-year to 1-year participation requirement. What we see is those ongoing incentives that are provided to participants on that regular cadence are a very important tool in keeping them engaged and continuing to participate throughout the life of the program's operations, to continue providing that charging at those meaningful grid-friendly periods. So with those ongoing incentives maintaining, we don't see a lot of risk coming from increased drop-off at the end of that 1-year mark, and do not anticipate any significant negative impacts of moving from 2 years to 1.
Great, thank you. All right, now I'm going to hand it off to Attorney Lefebvre for some questions.
Thank you. Yeah, following up on this whole discussion, I wanted to ask a question to the EDCs related to the response to interrogatory CAE 24, where Eversource commented that these new income eligibility requirements will dramatically reduce the pool of incentive eligible recipients, and that in the annual report, they estimated that current program participation in the EVSE and wiring rebates will shrink by 95%. So considering that, and considering this whole conversation that has just taken place, I was curious if there's any thought into modifying the enrollment incentive of $100 or the ongoing incentives, if there are any thoughts, I guess, either from the EDCs or from anyone else in the round table considering the dramatic decrease in those who will be eligible for the actual EVSE and wiring rebates.
So just so I understand, the suggestion is that you could increase the proposed $100 to something more because the pool is larger for the customers who would be going down that enrollment pathway. I just want to understand the mechanism and the question a little bit.
Yeah, sorry. I guess just considering that incentive dollars will not be available to a large amount of customers who under the previous, before this change in the law, those incentive dollars were available to them. I'm wondering if there's any thought that it would be necessary to amend that enrollment amount, or if it's still it still satisfies or is still enough of an incentive for customers.
Yeah, so I think like we believe in the current, like just in our current world where where there's a specific set of customers who aren't eligible for the EVSE incentive pathway to enroll in managed charging, that $100 is enough for them today. And so the idea is it's not a replacement for the customer's decision to buy an EV, which is part of what the larger equipment incentive is getting at, right? So they're two separate things. Like the equipment incentive is meant to augment the customer's decision to go with an EV. And managed charging enrollment incentive is meant for someone who's already made that decision to get their load under management. So I think the challenge would be mixing those two, and so you'd have to increase the enrollment incentive to the point where it becomes large enough to replace to be directed towards the customer's decision to or contribute to their decision to purchase an EV. So I don't know if that made sense, but it's really the incentives are getting at two different decisions, and one is the helping with the purchase of the equipment to enable their decision to buy an EV, and the other one is they're already there, but we want to get them under control, their load under control.
Yeah, I completely agree with Mr. Bowen's comments. So even though this may have not been specifically or directly stated previously, that the incentive structure that was in place previously is similar in some regards to the commercial Make Ready program, where the idea is to provide infrastructure that supports EV adoption, right? And in the absence of that, I think our observations are that we don't believe that it will significantly reduce the number of customers who may participate in our managed charging program. The market is changing all the time, and so as it happens right now, there are more automakers that are recognizing that a benefit to helping get customers into EVs is to assist them with EV charging. So there are some OEMs that are even going as far as helping customers, not only providing level 2 chargers or assistance for level 2 chargers, but even going as far as helping to get them installed. So and beyond that, the cost of OEM or excuse me, level 2 chargers, has come down. I think we need to be kind of cautious about how that might stay stable or not. But generally, I think it's the EDC's feeling that the enrollment incentive of $100 will be appropriate to incentivize the action of having an existing EV driver enroll in the managed charging program.
Thank you. I will just wait one more moment to see if anyone wants to respond to this conversation. If not, I'll move back to Jenna Vigrass. Yes, OCC.
Thanks. I was just going to say, everything the EDC just said does make sense to me conceptually. I think like we agree that we see the two different kind of categories of incentives as being aimed towards solving two different issues. The kind of upfront EVSE and connection incentive, as we recall from like 171203 RE04, was that when this program was born, the idea there was that was the economic incentive to meet the deployment goals, which were tied to EV deployment goals. So like what we're trying to do here simply is get more EVs on the road in Connecticut. How do we get there? We need to have more EV infrastructure available. How do we get there? We need to make the infrastructure somehow more affordable at the outset. And getting back to what I was saying before, also like the conceptual kind of financial benefit to ratepayers there is the sort of revenue requirement dilution or sales dilution concept of like, well, if we're selling, the kind of other benefit of having more charging going on is more sales, all else equal, ultimately reduces the volumetric impact on all ratepayers. But then, so that's like that's the idea of the upfront incentives. Then the managed charging incentives kind of like, in my mind, are a way to resolve a tertiary problem to the first solution, which is that all else equal part, like that it's only that economic benefit to all ratepayers only really works if you're not imposing incremental costs to the revenue requirement ultimately, which you are. Like if you're massively increasing demand, the utilities have to build more in order to meet that peak demand. So how do we mitigate that? Well, we got to reduce peak demand. We got to reduce the impact on the peak that we're bringing in by pulling in more chargers, right? So that's like the secondary, that's the way you solve that problem secondarily is the managed charging program. Anyway, maybe that was all too obvious to people or too philosophical or something, but I just want to say I agree that I do see them as two, like they're tools to solve two different issues. So I don't know that I think I agree that like that trying to solve, if the concern is that there's going to be reduction in demand or participation in people buying EV chargers to begin with as a result of the legislation, I don't know that it conceptually makes sense to try to fix that by increasing the appetite for managed charging.
I can't figure out how to use the raise hand function. It's driving me crazy, but I just had something to sort of chime in as well. I think Connecticut is unique in that the managed charging requirement has been linked to taking the upfront make-ready incentives, and that is not common in other jurisdictions. I think it's a great function of the Connecticut EV program. But you do see for those programs that have, just distinct, managed charging enrollment incentives and ongoing incentives, that what we offer for that in Connecticut is pretty much in line. I know there's some SEPA reports that are out there, but the whole structure of some sort of upfront enrollment incentive being between, $50 to $100, and then ongoing incentives, anywhere from like 5 to 10, that's pretty common. So I think that Connecticut's pretty well aligned there.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I just want to opine a little bit on this. I mean, I, as I was kind of alluding to before, I'm definitely an advocate of giving more of an incentive to underserved communities, but I think that it's just like a little bit extreme. I think what the $1,500 upfront incentive for those that qualify for the residential upfront incentive there. and then versus $100 for those that don't. I wonder if there could be some meeting in the middle there. Maybe even $300 or something. I feel like if it were for me, that would give that extra push there, and maybe not, and then maybe, I don't know, if down to $1,200 or something, $1,300 for the underserved. It just, like 100, it's significant, but it just, I wonder if it's going to be enough. I understand that EDCs felt more confident about that, but I'm just speaking from a personal perspective. I don't know if that would be enough to entice a number of people to, go through the paperwork and the busy work necessary to sign up for a new program.
Well, I will just, oh, sorry, go ahead, Amy.
I was going to say, I do think that's a fair point. And I think it is something to track. And I know it's something that we've been thinking about, given that this program is 5 years old at this point, is that enrollment incentive still the right amount? Should it be higher? Should it be lower? So, as the program continues, I think this is an important thing to keep an eye on. Are you seeing, a decrease in the number of enrollments? Maybe that could be a sign that enrollment incentive does need to increase. Similarly, if you're seeing participation fall off, could that be an indication that maybe the ongoing incentive needs to be revisited as well? So I think all of these are good things to keep track of.
Great point, Amy. I agree with a lot of that. I think it is something, and I appreciate the feedback, something that we will keep an eye on. I do feel that, from the looking around that we've done of peer programs, $50 is a fairly common upfront incentive. 100 is kind of on the higher end. So, I would think going a little bit higher might, may not be necessary. We've seen programs with a lot of growth that had a $50 enrollment incentive. I think it also kind of the pairing to that is something that, Jeremy, you hit up the nail on the head, is like, what is the sign up process like? And that is critically important and something we've been working with our providers. We want to make that smooth and easy and seamless and kind of, so it's partially the monetary, but it's also partially how do you make it easier? So I think those are both really critical elements to the dimension, but appreciate the points you're raising because we definitely share the vision, I think, shared with many here that we want to make sure we're getting those participants signed up, we're getting visibility into the load, and we're finding good, cost-effective ways to manage it. So very good points raised.
Yeah, I think it's a good point and a very important consideration of finding what that right balance is between level of enrollment incentive to drive sufficient participation rates while also balancing overall cost to serve within the programs. And there are studies, I can't put my fingers on them at the moment, but there have been some studies published that examine price elasticity around level of enrollment incentive and what that actually has for an impact on true enrollments into the programs. And those did show that there is, of course, a diminishing level of returns to increasing those enrollment incentives. So it's definitely one that needs to be continued to be monitored to understand what the impact these enrollment incentives are having on overall enrollment. But there's definitely some level of price elasticity in raising that above a certain amount in the incremental enrollments. It's really benefiting you looking at the overall value proposition of the programs.
Attorney Will.
Thanks. I just quickly wanted to make clear that despite what I said before, if the conversation is now, it seems to be the conversation is now about like whether the $100 incentive is sufficient to incentivize people to enroll specifically in managed charging. If that's the conversation, we would totally support taking another look at that. Like that incentive should be appropriately structured to accomplish what it's supposed to accomplish within the program budget and balanced, et cetera. So just wanted to throw out there, we don't disagree with those ideas at all.
Okay, and not seeing any other hands raised, so I'll wait another moment, but I will just move on to my next question. But thank you for all the comments there. So I think, sorry, I'm trying to decide which direction to go in. I think, Laura, I might have you go to the next slide. Yes, so they can see this incentive structure chart. So in CAE 15, an interrogatory we posed the EDCs, we pointed out that currently a customer with telematics and a non-networked level 2 charger is eligible to apply the $1,000 rebate towards a networked level 2 charger if they need a 240 volt outlet, but not eligible to apply the $1,000 rebate towards a networked level 2 charger if they already have a 240 V outlet. You can see this at the bottom of the chart on the last two rows. So I think in asking this interrog, wanted to not point, it may have read like we were saying, why is this so? The authority, this was in the decision last year. So not asking why it's like that, but I want to pose a question to the group. What I'm trying to get at is, should we be allowing telematics users to use the rebate dollars towards a network charger when they have the capability of participating through telematics? Would there be reason to allow them to use that rebate not just for the wiring upgrade, but for a network charger? And if so, is that because of concerns with data accuracy and accessibility of data? And I guess my last point is it may just have been a oversight that those last two rows don't really align. And I see Mr. Rose has raised his hand, so I'll point to you.
Thank you, Mr. Lefebvre. Yeah, so this chart was is from the last decision, and these were, I believe, conscious and discussed incentive structure through the various methods of the proceeding last year. I think based on our previous conversation, and the thought of having an incentive structure for EVSE that is designed to support EV adoption. I think our response somewhat alluded to this, maybe not specifically the way you just outlined it, but given what we've just discussed about those incentives supporting EV adoption, and the legislation that now limits eligibility for those incentives, our belief is that that customer class could benefit from those incentives, whether or not they have a 240 volt outlet or whether or not they have telematics, particularly if that customer class is this could support a used car market. As I mentioned earlier, some OEMs or automakers are providing level 2 infrastructure and support for it, but that may not be available in a used car market. So if the level 2 EVSE rebate and the subsequent and/or wiring rebate and the model now that's streamlined, you can use it for anything, and we're proposing to increase that to $1,500. That could definitely help support EV adoption amongst the customer classes that are now eligible. And so therefore our opinion was that it was certainly worth considering of making it available regardless of the this table, if that's helpful.
Yeah, so I'm gonna think on the fly a little bit here, but if the question is, should the up to $1,000 or in our new proposal up to $1,500 on the second to last row be reduced? I think that's kind of what you might be thinking. So the $1,500, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the $1,500 is like is meant to cover the average of the full installation of a wiring upgrade and a charger. So on average, although there's a huge variation, installing a 240 volt outlet with the work that might have to be done in the panel, on average $1,000, and chargers on average $500, which is where we came up with the 100% of $1,500. Could you, for that specific row, not have it be 1,500 and only be 1,000? You could. So you just introduce more tiers to the program, make it a slightly more complicated. But given the limited pool of eligible customers, and given that pool, especially in concentrated census tracts, tends to live in older homes where wiring tends to be more expensive than larger, newer homes, I would advocate for having the same incentive regardless of whether you're putting in just the 240 volt outlet or the 240 volt outlet and the charger.
Yeah, I think it's important to separate between how you participate and the need to charge your vehicle, right? Just to summarize what I think both Mr. Bowen and myself said.
Okay, yeah, sorry, because the question, I may not be wording it as clear as I could be wording it. I guess what I'm trying to think through is, so in that last two rows, that customer has telematics and a non-networked level 2 charger. So they could participate as long as they have that 240V outlet. So maybe it doesn't, maybe I need to think this through more. Maybe it doesn't matter in the end if that $1,000, how they use that, but I think my question is, if that customer they have telematics, they have a non-network level 2 charger, why, if they can participate, if they really just need to get to participation, if they really just need that outlet, why are we also allowing them to use the rebate towards the network charger when they could just participate through telematics? And I think previously alluding to, is that because we want to incentivize those who can participate with telematics still to get a networked charger, because there's concern over data accuracy and accessibility through participating just with telematics. Does that clear it up any more so than previously?
I think I get it. So yeah, I think you're saying that the 1,000 or 1,500, and I'm saying that's still an appropriate number. It only need be used to install the outlet and the work that goes into installing the outlet. And that if such a customer submitted for a rebate for both the wiring and a new charger when they didn't need one, I think that's what you're getting at. But I would defer to the implementation team on our ability to discern whether they need one or not. But
yeah, and I think that's a very important point that Mr. Bowen just brought up. So the definition of the need. And so, and whether they have a 240 volt lit or they don't. So, customers submit rebates to us for equipment that they purchased or work that they've had done for wiring. And I think that the need is really the need is hard to determine, right? So we're not going out to people's homes and inspecting them to ensure that, they need a 240 volt outlet. We're assuming that when they submit a legitimate invoice from an electrical contractor, that they needed to install a 240 volt outlet. In some cases, maybe they had a 240 volt outlet for their dryer in a laundry room that was, on the other side of the house. And, maybe they needed another 240 volt outlet in their garage where they charge their electric vehicle, right? So I think need is relative. If we get an invoice from a customer for a qualified electrician for installation of a 240 volt outlet, that's what defines need for us.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you for those responses. I'm going to move it back to Jenna for more questions.
Great, thank you. Laura, is it possible to move back to the last slide? Thank you. All right, so I actually just wanted to follow up on what Attorney Lefebvre was alluding to, is this question of kind of managed charging integration and data that's provided versus that is provided by vehicle telematics versus what is provided by networked EVSEs. And I know that the company's provided a little bit of information in comments and interrogatories, but I'm wondering if we could have this as a roundtable discussion prompt of how kind of the industry is looking at these two sources of data and managed charging integration, and how this program might think about the two sources moving forward. So we can start with Eversource.
Hey, sure. This is Amanda Stevens. So, I think as we said, summarized in our interrogatory, our focus with this program over the last several years has really been, growing market awareness, scaling, enrolling customers, providing a flexible suite of options to make sure we can maximize participation. It's still in the early-ish stages. I wouldn't say nascent, but we're still kind of learning a lot, I think, about demand response and our electric vehicle sector. A lot of opportunities there, a lot of excitement, but we're still kind of in that learning phase. So, we've felt that, as we've tried to kind of support customers with being able to enroll in the program, they might contact us and their vehicle's not listed. And so, we're constantly looking for kind of what are the avenues we can open up to make sure we're able to support as many of our customers, our residential customers who want to participate. And so we are working with two DERMS providers to do that now. We are leveraging both vehicle telematics and the charger integrations. So that is, we've found success at this point in doing so. But I fully appreciate there's sort of a lot of discussion going on in the industry around this. We've made a business decision to kind of pursue this at this point, to kind of offer maximum flexibility for customers, maximum options, again, scaling focused, but fully appreciate there's sort of different ways to tackle this. And I think above all, I think we're committed to remaining abreast of the industry trends and learning kind of how do we continue to grow this and be cost effective, and be successful at managing our customers and helping them in that space. So I'll leave it there and maybe pass the torch if someone else wants to.
Sure, thank you. So now moving on to UI. Oh, you're muted.
Good for Zoom. Let you know right away when you start talking and you're on mute. So yeah, on this subject, I agree very much with what Eversource has just said. I think the issue of telematics versus networked EVSE integration has really probably the best example of this is really in California and the work that's been done there for over a decade. And I think what we don't want to do is exclude people from participation, but recognizing that there is a difference, and I will also put a caveat around the work that's been done in California, where a lot of that work was focused on sub-metering and perhaps using EVSE or telematics for billing purposes. So that is a very unique structure. But I think it's very interesting that through all of that research and testing that they did, they came up with these results, right? So I think it's important that we just recognize that there are differences, that the comments that UI has made about some of the work. New York has just started within the last year or two to start down this road. They've gotten a lot of the similar, early results. Others have pointed out that the work in New York was, I think, as UI did as well. The work in New York was to develop an accuracy testing accuracy methodology, and as part of that, just verifying the methodology, a small sample of vehicles were tested. But I think the results that came back were very similar to what's been experienced out in California. So it's important to note that in both cases, the variance, even though EVSE has a lower variance than telematics, has been to the ratepayers' advantage. So these variances that have been observed have been observed to be so that customers are not getting overpaid. EV drivers are not getting overpaid in this case. So let's say EVSE has a 2% variation, 1 to 2% variation from a meter. That variation is in the ratepayers to the ratepayers' benefit, right? They're being, let's say under-reported, and let's say telematics is perhaps somewhat less. There is a greater gap, let's just say. That again, that is to the ratepayers' benefit. And so I think the important thing is that as policymakers and as a regulatory body and all of us as stakeholders, that we work together to ensure that we continue to monitor these things, that we ensure open access to all participants. From the very start, I think back, I liked Attorney Wheel's comment that when in RE04, when the program was born, I think we've been very consistent about being technology agnostic, and not favoring one technology over another in order to have more participation in managed charging. And then I'll just actually sum it up with that it's more important to get the participation in managed charging than it is to focus on the difference between accuracy, whether it's EVSE or vehicle telematics.
I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so OCC, would you like to comment?
I just generally say that I especially agree with what Mr. Rosa said at the end there. And I think this is actually at least conceptually similar to conversations we had in that underlying docket, because I remember there were conversations about like proprietary charging standards, for instance, back then. And we took a similar position, like what we think, whatever can ensure that the broadest level of participation is possible without sacrificing material issues. In other words, I think accuracy is important. I mean, I think when it comes to like metering in general, there's going to be inaccuracy leads to winners and losers, but like ultimately the cost gets passed to somebody, whether it's like the program participant or everybody else. So since we advocate for both of those parties, like those are all, ratepayers on both sides of the coin, we kind of have to land at supporting accuracy in all instances, but also recognizing that I think maybe what Mr. Rosa was getting at is if the accuracy isn't so material as to outweigh the overall benefit of broader program participation, I think we agree with that too. So we just generally support ideas of making sure that as many different kinds of technologies can kind of talk to each other in order to make this whole system work.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so now we will move to ChargeScape.
Yeah, I think definitely echoing the previous sentiments that at this point it's sort of an all of the above. You just want to be able to have customers participate through the charger, through their telematics. I do think that telematics represents a huge opportunity down the road. So when you start to think about, an EV as sort of like a mobile, asset that, could plug in and even send energy back to the grid, anywhere in this sort of future state of like vehicle to grid integration, that just represents a tremendous opportunity. And I think that there's sort of that widely accepted, sentiment out there that OEMs did not create telematics to serve utility like managed charging or billing purposes. So that is like a fundamental thing that we are sort of working through like as an industry now. I know our investor OEMs at ChargeScape feel really strongly about making telematics, more accessible and more useful for utility programs. They've totally bought into this. They believe that this is, the way of the future, like vehicle grid integration, V2X, like all of it. But I do think that, there is room for improvement for sure. But you've got, the utilities that are going to need the EVs to be these assets. And you've got the OEMs that have the ability to build out these capabilities. It's sort of, we're in a place now where we need to sort of bring the two together and move them forward. So I think I'll leave it there, but I'm optimistic about telematics. I do think EVSE is super important in the near term as well.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so now we can move to Jeremy at CTC.
I don't think I have anything more to add on this topic.
Great, thank you. And now moving to EV Energy.
We will largely echo the comments shared by others on this call. It's super important to us that that these programs be designed in a way that allow for as many EV driving customers as possible to be able to participate. And open access is really critical as a very compelling way to ensure the broadest coverage possible is available is to support multiple technology models. And through our programs, we've seen customers have great outcomes participating through their EVSE. One thing that we'll just add here is that customer choice is important to us. And we do see on several occasions that certain customers that are able to participate both with their telematics systems and their chargers actually have a strong preference. Some customers want to participate through their telematics system if they've purchased their telematics package through their OEM, and that was a key reason they did so. But we also have lots of customers who specifically purchased a network charger because they want to participate through their charger, and they would prefer not to participate with their vehicle. So supporting multiple technology pathways and taking an all of the above approach allows for more customer choice, which makes these programs more successful and drives better outcomes.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Bygrass, on this subject, did you intend to just discuss accuracy or the subject more broadly, as it was just addressed?
Yeah, I think that the prompt was about kind of the use of both options within the program, both around accuracy, but also access to the data, since I know that that has been an issue within the industry, but also just kind of how, how valuable is each kind of source of data to the EDCs and how those might be modified in the program in future years.
Yeah. The reason I asked is because the comments that were just made, I thought were hit on an important point, which was telematics, and I think an important point also raised by Ms. Finley. Telematics are an additional service offered by OEMs, and customers have a choice whether to subscribe to those services or not. And some people may not, and so I think that's another reason why it's important that we have broad open access to vehicle telematics and network EVSE. And actually, really, there's no harm in having both if it's available. It provides a good balance. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of make that point that in cases where customers choose not to subscribe to telematic services, an EVSE is the only way we're going to be able to integrate with that customer. So, and I do agree with the comments made by Ms. Finley that there certainly are a lot of opportunities, and I think utilities all across the spectrum recognize the opportunities with telematics. And I appreciate the comments made by Ms. Finley, that the telematics were not developed for managed charging programs, and so and I appreciate her comments about the OEM's commitment there, because I think the difference between EVSE and telematics fundamentally right now are standards, and got a long way to go in terms of standards for telematics, and I think that's fair. I think that's okay, but I think we need to recognize that we need to get to standards around telematics, but that needs to happen nationally and amongst a large, very dynamic group. So with that, I'll just that's all I wanted to say.
Perfect, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, so Laura, I'm wondering, could you move to the next slide, please? All right, so just in the interest of time, I think we're going to move to this last topic of kind of the valuation of avoided costs. And I know that the prompt here talks about EV managed charging, but I'm actually hoping that we can expand that a little bit to think about just kind of the value that additional EVs on the grid provide to other ratepayers and then to the electric grid as well. And I know that we do have the EM&V report from last year that has kind of a benefit cost analysis. And so I'm wondering if the EDCs can kind of give a broad strokes overview of some of the benefits that were calculated through that, specifically to if there are any kind of like price per kilowatt reduction in rates as a result of these kind of additional EVs that are charging, that's pushing down rates, or price per kilowatt O&M cost reductions because of managed charging on the electric grid, or things like that, of a boiled down kind of more specific value of avoided costs that was conducted in that BCA analysis from last year. So I don't know if Eversource or UI want to start.
I think we would recognizing, I think, we certainly commented on these in our interrogatory responses. And realizing that a lot of this is coming from a report that was circulated. And I think it would be best for us to have our evaluation partner speak to this, because honestly, we are subject matters of the implementation of these programs, not necessarily the evaluation of these programs. Full transparency. So I think in general, what we showed was that the program was cost beneficial, or maybe not cost beneficial, but provided downward pressure on rates. So if our representatives from demand side analytics are available to discuss the benefit cost analysis, and Eversource, I think you'd be in agreement, we can have them speak to that.
Yeah, I'm here, but
agree.
I actually wasn't on that work, and Adriana is not around. So I'm just going to defer to the response that we gave in the IR. Yeah.
Okay. That is we were aware that our key evaluation partner that was going to speak to this was only available to noon. So I apologize for that. We are at 12:02. I think I'm going to I guess we could really I think what in our response we talked about what would be required to get to certain types of cost benefit frameworks that were discussed by Pura. And I think the question really comes down to is the current benefit cost analysis that we're doing in the cycle report sufficient or equal, or is there a better way to do it? And I don't think our response suggested that there was a better way to do it. I think our response indicated that we could look. I know that one of the IR specifically addressed active managed charging, and I'm not sure if it was the intent. I assume that since the question was written that way, it was specifically related to active managed charging. And so we had quite a lengthy response on how active managed charging could be analyzed from a cost benefit perspective as a separate let's say a view of cost benefit. In general, without the EM&V vendor being here, I can say that our response basically summarized that, yes, it could be done. It would be very challenging to do that. And there we explained kind of in detail how the evaluation partner could could do it and all the steps that would be necessary to do it, and kind of checks and balances about the results. I think at the end of the day, when you look at active managed charging, and I think one of the things that particularly concerned me, if I may speak to this, was a suggestion that the managed charging, if the managed charging program were to shift from an off-peak program to a localized distribution program. And if that's something that is being considered right now by Pura, I would encourage you to not look at it in that respect. And I would hope that other stakeholders might weigh in here because the value from it, there's value in managed charging, whether it's active or or behavioral. And I think the response to our interrogatory talked about how the cost benefit around active managed charging is there's three cost benefits, right? There's the wholesale, there's the T&D, and then the third element is eluding me in the response, so I apologize. But for active managed charging, the largest proponent of cost benefit was around the T&D. And therefore lies the challenge of trying to, specifically identify cost benefits associated around just the T&D rather than a more holistic benefit cost analysis than we provide in the cycle report today. And so, but beyond the cost benefit analysis, I think it's important to say, we would not be in favor of a program that focused only on off-peak avoidance versus one that focused only on T&D. And I think other stakeholders may weigh in here to say that if you look at that report that's referenced by the authority in whole, it's looking at a complete value stack, not just the localized distribution is just one aspect of that. And that managed charging, all managed charging, especially at scale, is going to bring value for the ratepayer. So I want to just distinguish between those two because thought it was really important, Ms. Vigrass, when I saw that, and I was like, if we shift from peak avoidance to T&D, localized distribution, that concerned me a little bit, to be honest. I think we don't want to be looking at vehicle to grid integration in that respect. I think we want to integrate all load. And then manage the localized constraints separately for additional value that might be extracted. Okay. And so that was a long response. And actually, I'm pretty proud of myself for not being an evaluation and measurement and verification SME. I think I did a pretty good job. I don't know, Marshall, what would you say? Would you agree?
That was good. I'd say you covered the main points.
Okay, great. Yeah, I feel pretty good.
I
Thanks.
appreciate that. Thank you. And I think I appreciate the point of having a managed charging program that addresses multiple levels of we're having multiple goals and having a holistic program. I guess my only question before I open it to other stakeholders who might want to provide some comments is with the managed charging program as it is structured, is there that focus on the localized distribution system? So within, I guess, maybe the active managed charging tier, is it modifying drivers charging based on those localized distribution system conditions, or is there any targeting based off of you're seeing one area of the grid being more constrained than another, and so you're actively targeting that area to enroll in the active managed charging tier, or any of that? Is that part of the overall program?
Go ahead, Amanda.
I could take a first swing at that. So great question. Something we're always actively talking about. I will say currently in Connecticut, no, we're targeting the ISO New England system peak as we consider that peak load reduction and the shifting. Looking forward, you're spot on. That's absolutely something that we're thinking about. We're not there yet, but it's something that we're actively thinking about in terms of the needs to take the program and think about if and how it can support in those localized ways.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda, and or Ms. Stevens. I fully agree. I think our providers are capable of offering of doing that, and basically, yes, you're correct. So, just to answer your question more broadly, you had asked, how it's accomplished, and yes, essentially, the EDCs would work with our existing managed charging platform providers and essentially, overlay, if you will, the distribution system network as it's designed into a broader, maybe other stakeholders can speak to this better, but into a, and then identify pockets, localized pockets. I think we're very interested in looking at that. You could back into it because we've had some discussions about this with our providers, and they've given us some examples of some areas that could be may have high level of participants in a local area. But I think it's important to keep in mind that when we talk about managing localized distribution and EV charging at the distribution level, we're talking about at scale, right? Because from a residential perspective, the distribution system is fairly robust, and we have large transformers, but you could still maybe, I think it still has value to start thinking about this now and exploring it and thinking about how we might be able to implement it and seeing if there are ways to test out maybe smaller pockets that we could reach out to. And yes, to answer your question, those customers may already be in the program, or if we are able to identify EV load, and actually that would be the primary way right now is identifying existing participants, which is why we want many participants, because if they're not in the program, we may not know that they are maybe have an EV and tied into the same transformer, right? So it's important to we can work backwards from that at a distribution level and try to identify those customers, but it's really beneficial if we have customers that are already in the program. And yeah, we would target them. I think going back to the discussion earlier about what the enrollment incentive should be is, if we find that there are, certain constrained areas locally, is it maybe more valuable to provide them with perhaps an additional incentive, so that's all I have.
Thanks. I appreciate that. All right. So now I'll open it up to any other stakeholders that might want to comment on this.
I didn't have any comments on this, but I realize it's already, this meeting is already going quite late, but I did want to open it up to one other topic if possible toward the end.
Sure, that sounds great.
Thank you.
I just want to say supportive of the EDC's approach here. I think, the Connecticut EV program design from the start really enabled, within that advanced tier, the ability to strategically target, localized distribution constraints. So I think it's just a matter, as Ms. Stevens was saying, of, actually getting that sort of working relationship, in order to be able to identify where these constraints are happening outside of, ISO New England peaks, because it's a lot more visible, I think, to everyone if you follow the ISO New England express charts, to tell when the system peaks are forecast to happen. It's a little bit trickier to work with our internal system operations.
All right, and Max.
Thank you. Yeah, I would certainly echo a lot of the feedback that Ms. Stevens and Mr. Rosa provided, where one, I think it is a good point that within managed charging, it is important to make sure that we're looking at considering all those potential avenues within the value stack holistically, so that we're not looking at programs that are chasing one over the other. But I think importantly, in moving to the distribution system valuation, the points they raised there ring quite true, where it becomes a stepwise process to get to that distribution value piece. And the way that the programs have been designed with the active tiers today really do enable that evolution to go, because We are engaging overall for these to be successful, a large base of consumers, and these programs without those consumers ultimately are nothing. And so building a program that allows consumers to establish themselves on that learning curve and gain familiarity with managed charging in this sequential rollout that we're seeing now through passive programs, through active programs, and progressing into distribution system optimization sets that framework that we're gaining that customer comfort and familiarity with these first off. And then it really having that program design going kind of back to the conversation on EVSE and telematics is having those multiple participation pathways and broadening the potential reach of customers that can participate in these allows for that scale piece that's really critical, because you need that scale and the effective amount of load under control as you start drilling down into these more localized distribution pockets or constraint areas. And so everything that's being done today really is setting those foundations that will allow us to continue progress towards that distribution optimization as we continue scaling the programs, as we continue identifying where the areas of constraint are and where the most value is to strategically manage the charging around those constraints.
Great, thank you. All right, so I think we're hoping to go to 12:30 today. So I think Jeremy, there might be 5 or 10 minutes for your additional topic, if that works for you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. It was just regarding level 1 charging and smart outlets. As I reviewed in my presentation, I can recap over that if that would be helpful. I was just wondering what feedback others might have about that.
Sure. It would be helpful to hear from maybe the utilities first, and then we can move to other groups. So maybe Eversource can start us off.
Yeah, I mean, I recall when the program was sort of first developed, we did, discuss level 1 charging, and the conclusion was that given the scale of the program and the limited available ratepayer dollars at that time, that the focus should really be on the level 2 and DC fast charging pathways that we chose. I think that's probably even more true today with the budget limitations, that we probably want to focus those even more precious now bond dollars on those more focused programs. So that's probably a initial starting point that I would have feedback on.
Great. And UI?
I think I would just echo Kevin's comments. I think that as discussed, we're already kind of being squeezed and having to reduce incentive levels across other program areas. So I think Jeremy, you alluded to this in your presentation, that you acknowledged that that was a potential consideration and concern. I do think that there was some potential progress made earlier during the roundtable around potentially rethinking the definition of how we handle those smaller MUDs and potentially supporting 3 or 4 unit MUDs under the existing program structure. But I think that would be sort of in terms of level 1, I think that I would kind of echo Kevin's sentiments that were just shared.
What about even low power level 2 smart outlets? Have you been following that technology at all?
So I'll just comment for you. I think in general, I think the EDCs are really very focused and very interested and committed, I think, to DERs in general. And so when we think about DERs and as a whole, from a distribution management perspective, it is really about the ability to provide grid flexibility and or resiliency. And so when we talk about those two things, grid flexibility and resiliency, and in the use of DERs on the distribution system in order to enable grid flexibility, there are diminishing returns. And when we talk about DERs that are capable of providing the greatest value to ratepayers for grid flexibility, we're really talking about, let's say, EVs, solar, heat pumps to a large extent, other distributed and batteries, battery storage, and how will those systems all integrate and work together? And the utilities are really, and not just here in Connecticut, all across the country, are really, moving in this direction of really integrating distributed energy resources for the benefit of grid flexibility and resiliency. And I'll just repeat that at a certain point, there becomes diminishing returns. I would say the lowest level right now that we really look at in terms of like a DER would be a smart thermostat, only because they may be controlling electric heat pumps, but also other forms of energy that en masse we can scale at very large volumes, right? So if we have millions of customers, you potentially could have hundreds of thousands of thermostats. And so I think and that technology has come quite a long way. So I don't want to discourage you from thinking out of the box or bringing ideas forth. I'm just kind of trying to level set for you a broader kind of perspective from a distribution system operation perspective.
I understand that. Yeah, thank you. And I recognize the value of DERs and how smart outlets don't really have that ability, and certainly not standard level 1 outlets. They don't have that ability to, you wouldn't be able to enroll people in the managed charging program through them. However, they also don't, like they require lower service sizes in general than level 2 does. So, if the concern is the strain on the grid, I think that level 1 is perhaps worth considering in that way, and being able to distribute the power, the available power when that's limited to more spaces rather than just a few. I think that in many cases can be more of an economical and efficient use of the available amperage in a given building. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I'd just encourage you to consider those benefits as well, in addition to the DER side.
Great. Thanks so much. I'll hand it over to Attorney Lefebvre now to wrap us up.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Being very aware that it's about 12:30 and it's Friday. I appreciate all the back and forth, the dialogue we had. I think it was very productive, and I just wanted to say we really appreciate everyone's participation and attention. Just a few more non-discussion points that I'll just wrap up very quickly, but just to kind of move the ball forward for next steps. First, the EDCs had mentioned that they had some points that needed to be clarified, especially with regards to the proposed modifications to align with the new cap on the incentives. And so what the authority would request from the EDCs is that the request for clarification that you had put in your written comment responses, that you file that as a motion for clarification, so that we can get that ruled on prior to the final decision, since the final decision is not going to be issued until December 10th. And we recognize that there's a little urgency with that. So to be specific, I know you spoke about this a little bit before, but that there are 3 events: when applications are received, when they are processed, and awards are committed or incentives are awarded, and then when the incentive is actually paid. And that the EDCs want to know whether the intention of the authority in our ruling to motion number 7 was that the cap does not apply to applications received and awarded in 2025, or that the cap does not apply to applications received in 2025 but awarded in 2026. So we see the urgency there to get that figured out. So if you could give me one moment, because I also wanted to make sure that in that motion, we would request that you include a discussion on if the EDCs adopted a structure in which applications that are received in 2025, regardless of when incentives are awarded or actually paid, are not subject to the cap, do the EDCs still need a transition plan? So that would be Pure's request, to have that motion filed. And then additionally, the authority appreciates the responses to the interrogatories regarding errors in the program manual, and would just ask that the EDCs collaborate on what modifications of the program manual would be needed. These were interrogatories 14, 16, 17, and 19, so that those changes can be consistent between the EDCs and be updated, so that those still applying through the end of 2025 have that correct information in the program manuals. And with that, the next steps will be that briefs are due on October 10th, and the proposed final decision will be issued on November 10th, with written exceptions due on November 25th, with the final decision being December 10th. And sorry, I see Mr. Morris's hand is raised.
Yeah, quick question, and thank you for that clarification. So just to, you mind, you stated if the EDCs were to adopt a structure where, and you talked about timing of applications received versus awarded. Can you just repeat that prompt, just so I make sure that we have it properly?
Yeah, sorry, because I know I think that I started saying it because there's 3 events, like you clarified in your written comments. There's when applications are received, when the EDCs commit to awarding an incentive, and when the incentive is actually paid. So let me try to think of exactly how to. So,
is this about the transition
yes.
plan? Okay, so essentially that if the EDCs adopted a structure where the you receive the application in 2025, and the even if that incentive is awarded in 2026, that is still, like, let's say the authority adopts a structure where those applications that are awarded in 2026 are still not subject to the cap, then will the utilities still need a transition plan? Or if you're able to just kind of like receive applications throughout 2025, and regardless of when they're being awarded, they're still not subject to that cap. Can you just kind of continue until, January, and then on January 1st, you transition over to the new structure? So if you could include that in your motion, maybe essentially a scenario analysis under like the scenario in which the EDC is contemplated, the scenario in which I just provided, what kind of transition period or plan will the EDCs need?
Under the assumption that because it would depend, and we can put this in the clarification on whether the commercial incentive changes or not. In other words, because you do understand, and I can explain why if it's appropriate or not, but the customers would need time to understand what they're applying for. And so it's like a seamless, like a December 31st application and a Jan 1 application, the customer would need to know, to make an informed decision about their plans, what exactly they're applying to. So if there were no change in the application or in the incentive structure, there may be less of a need for a transition plan. But if there were, and so in the residential, because there is a change in eligibility, there may still be need for a transition plan. That's so.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's
that makes
helpful.
sense.
Yeah, if you could
so we can write
those,
it both, all of those factors.
Right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
that'd be great. Thank you.
And one more clarifying question, timing, is there a date by which you'd like us to have filed that motion besides as soon as possible?
Yes, I think really, just, yes, sorry, that's not a clear answer, but as soon as possible, recognizing, to try to, give enough time to give you an answer so you can begin to plan on what is going to happen with those. So maybe, let's say a week. I don't know if that is possible.
Yeah, we'll plan to, if it makes sense, we'll plan to file by the end of next week, if that's amenable to the authority.
Yes, that works. Mr. Rosa.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to ask a question of the authority. If this is the only additional, input you're going to seek, or if you have any thoughts, if the authority has considered whether it's appropriate to reconsider the port deployment targets that were established in the original order, so that there might be a balance between what incentives might be offered versus what could realistically be achieved. That's all. I know if adjusting port targets is, I don't know if you can really share this, but it doesn't, but if adjusting port targets is not within, something the authority is thinking about, then it really only comes down to incentive levels. And I just was curious if Pura had any thoughts on that subject.
Thanks for that. I think to date, that has not been a topic included in written comments or interrogatories, or included in this technical meeting. So there has not been kind of an evidentiary record built up on that topic. But if stakeholders would like the authority to review that topic or idea, the EDCs are welcome to include that in their motion, or encourage us to review that potentially in next year's review.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you everyone for bearing with us through that. And enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you all again.